Committee to order. I don't know that we have an official name, but it is the Contract Negotiation Committee that was established at the last council meeting with a motion by Bill Alms. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here. I know this was short notice, but for everybody's sake, I thought it was important to get these negotiations underway as quickly as possible and see if we can get a contract before the full council. My timeline would be, again, I think for everybody's benefit and in everybody's best interest, I'd like to try to get this done and have something to the council in a month. And that would mean that, and then get an up or down vote. And see what happens. If it's an affirmative vote, we move on with Lakeview. If it's not, then we're that much closer sooner within a month to settling in and trying to get a fix to the St. Croix EMS. So I would hope that that's agreeable with everyone to try to get this done as quickly as we can. And I would like to set two meetings for next week. I've got an agenda here, or rather I have a list of the meeting times, days and times that are available for this room next week, and we can discuss that later when we get to the end of the meeting. And then proceed from there, maybe two meetings a week until we get this done. Just want to make sure everybody's in agreement that works. Paul, I know you work during the day. We were going to, and I think everybody's okay with doing this in the evening.
Good.
Okay. Meetings are open. They are being televised. We don't know that there would be any need for going into closed session, but if that need does arise, Kathy will direct us as to whether we can go into closed session. And that would be either at the request of the committee members or perhaps Lakeview if there is sensitive information that they feel that cannot be revealed to the public. But then again, that would be a call that Kathy would have to make, and with her guidance, we would make that determination. The way that I would like to try to proceed is, we don't actually have an agenda constructed for today because I wanted to just kind of take ideas from the committee members. But I had asked if Lakeview could put together what they heard as far as concerns from our council members. And then try to go through those. I think they presented something to everybody here. I want everybody to take a very close look at that. Make any additions if you see that there is something that was not included that were of concerns. And we'll get those added, and then our agendas in the future will be working on these items. One of the things that I wanted to do is to try to get all of the things in which we're in agreement out of the way right away. There are going to be some things that we know that are going to be difficult as far as discussion, negotiations, and I think from what I've seen, the biggest piece and the biggest concern that I've heard coming from council members, Weber and DeZiel, had to do with the communication piece from the county, and I think that we need to get down to that as quickly as we can. I really don't care to deal with that today. Like I said, I want to get all the things that we're in agreement on out of the way right away, and then start to focus on those things that we're not in agreement on or that need further education, digging down, or negotiations. And we will be inviting the county in. They know that. And so when we get down to the pieces that involve other parties, we'll ask them to sit in on those meetings. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Everybody good? Mm-hmm. Who wants to begin?
Well, I've got there are a few issues related to St. Croix EMS, and our objective here is to replace them as a body, but we've got a couple of things that they do. One is the dive team, and the other that's under their responsibility, and well, the emergency service manager. So I guess those are Hudson issues, but we need to make sure we get those taken, figure out how to address those.
Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah, we can get those out of the way.
Sure. We have, I think, as a council, we made it clear that we wanted to hang on to the dive team. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I think that it's critical that we do, but let's hear what Lakeview has to say. Okay, do you want to, Nate, identify yourself, and anybody else that comes to Mike, please identify yourself.
Nathan Pulsher, VP of Ancillary Services at Lakeview. Specifically related to the dive team, we understood that you had wanted to maintain that control, and we're completely fine with that.
Okay. What was the other part?
Yeah, well, the other piece of that is where are we going to, what are we going to do with that? We kicked around a couple things, either fire department or the police department, and
Okay,
go that far, we want to come back and,
yeah, that has nothing to do with as long as Lakeview has said that they are, think it's a good idea that we hang on to that. That's something that we'll have to deal with and resolve on our own. I was presuming after our last conversation that they would maintain the facility that they have below, and then anything else that they would be over at Ward Avenue, but we can deal with that
Yeah.
with the council.
great. And I think the same applies to emergency services manager. Obviously, that's a local issue, so we'll have,
Okay?
Yeah,
how will
who
that
in
come
the city
through,
will be appointed.
through public safety? Is that where that
Yes.
would start?
Yeah,
Both of those? Okay.
yeah. All right, next. Paul, anything?
This is brand new, so am I right, we're supposed to be reading through this to,
Well, what this
where do you
is,
want us to start? That's what I'm trying to
it's a
figure out.
list of the issues that Lakeview heard at the council meeting in which, well, throughout the interviewing process and at the last council meeting. For example, many of the issues that you identified at the last council meeting, I think capital assets was an issue for you, and that's where this list was generated, and then this is language out of their proposal that they found that addressed some of the items on this list. Is that what that is?
Yeah, can I clarify a little bit? So Paul, a lot of these were elements that we had heard throughout the last, frankly, year. And then in many of the comments that came out in the last several meetings, we tried to align list those, so we made sure we captured your ideas. Your 7 is an example from the last meeting. Are included, may not be specifically listed here, but they're included in some of the elements of these 13. Okay, we want to make sure those are captured. Now, the language in the back side, if you flip these pages up, the language here is pulled out of our RFP response or some similar language, as an example, out of the Town of Hudson contract, so I didn't have to rewrite everything. But it's relevant for discussion here. It's not intended to be specific contract language in as much as it is to drive a conversation around that point.
Okay,
What I want to make sure we're clear on, and not to read every one of those in the back pages, but to make sure that we're capturing what's important to you and what's important to your constituents in the community in this front sheet. As I told Kathy earlier, we want to make sure that we address everything that has been identified throughout this process. Even if it's going to be a quick discussion, I want to make sure that it's noted and identified here.
The actual contract language obviously will be written
Yeah,
between
well-
Kathy
Yeah.
and Paul.
Carl
Or
Ammons.
Carl, rather.
And Carl, just so everyone is clear in the room, Carl Ammons is on the phone right here.
Okay.
So if there are questions that certainly legal needs to step in on,
so are we being asked to look at the 13 areas in terms of how they're written out and give feedback as to whether?
I would,
Yeah, why don't we, you know what, I think just to make things easier, if it's okay with everybody, we have the scope of service elements already listed. Why don't we just go through them one by one and see if there are any issues there?
Okay,
Does that
yeah,
make
that's
sense?
good, yeah. I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Okay.
and just so I could clarify a little bit, instead of going through each one on the back page, should we make sure that that list is complete as it is? And if there are other thoughts that you have, let's add it to that list now, and they may be included in our discussion down the road.
Well, what I was going to suggest is that we do actually start to look at some of the language here so that
Okay?
it will bring us back to the proposal, a lot of the language. And because I don't expect everybody to fill in the blanks if there are any deletions, omissions rather, right now. They may stumble upon some as we go through the discussions and add them.
Sounds good.
At that point. Does that work?
Yep, that works fine.
Everybody good with that? All right, service area. So this is intended just for the city of Hudson. That's all that we're negotiating right now. Everybody right?
Yep.
Good?
Yeah, but
Anything?
question, yeah, I have some questions related to that is, obviously, or I think, that the town of Hudson is basically going to be under the same or similar contract. I'll back up. We have a 911 response area that we are listed in the county as being responsible for. So is Lakeview going to assume that same responsibility of area?
Yeah, so this,
The only differences are probably a little bit of the town of Hammond, half the town of Troy, and then the village.
yeah, so the service area is a piece that is going to have to be negotiated. Town of Hudson is carved out, obviously, but there's going to have to be, if Town of Troy wants to be part of this, or separate contract ideally, that service area will have to be addressed at face value.
Yeah. But I'm assuming, to me, obviously, those are going to blend together.
Yes.
Well,
And it's
I
going to
guess
be.
we
it's
can't
not- I'm
assume
looking at it,
that.
It's just the way St. Croix EMS that's what the final picture is going to be. It's whatever St. Croix EMS covered is going to be mostly
Right.
what Lakeview covers.
Right, so
Just-
from the
you'll have
outside
some
looking in,
individual contracts,
right,
but-
from our perspective, we're going to look at it as one service area. But the communities are going to have to look at it from their individual viewpoints. Does that make sense?
And Nate, I think, we wrote language into the city of the town of Hudson contract that recognized a regional solution is what we're headed for. So I think somehow we have
Didn't pick
to
that up.
account for just what you're getting at, to make sure that everybody's in agreement, even though we have individual contracts, that we have a regional approach to this.
Yeah, I think that's important. I'm glad to hear that.
Yep, noted.
Anything else? Anybody?
On that point, because as we're looking at it and as we are deciding for the city of Hudson, we also have to, is the contract language, is the coverage that you guys are talking about, is that for the entire area, or does that morph as more communities come into play?
So we're looking at this service area as one large service area to
Right.
cover.
Right,
That would include the village, city of Hudson, town of Troy.
gotcha.
And that's coming into that. Now,
Right.
if they don't partner with us, say the town of Troy does not, I don't think that necessarily changes our approach.
It's still the same
Still
coverage?
the same coverage.
Okay.
So I have some difficulty with the language here where it says, the number of ambulances and personnel utilized by Lakeview EMS to perform EMS services in the service area may, in the hospital's sole discretion, increase from time to time to accommodate increasing run volume in the service area and will be increased if performance standards are not being met. And I just think that cannot be at the hospital's sole discretion. And I think my point was at that last meeting, the contract has to have very specific number triggers for run volume. It is the number triggers that would trigger that. It would not be, I would not be comfortable with that language at the sole discretion of the hospital.
Is,
So to me, that's a non-starter. It has to be in relationship to run volume in a contract that would trigger it, not at the hospital's sole discretion.
So,
Because if it's at the hospital's sole discretion, the run volumes might increase, and the hospital might say, yeah, but we're just not there yet for adding a third one or another half of one. And that's just that's too vague, and it gives too much power to the hospital, I think, to do that. We need to protect our people based on run volume, so I'm not comfortable with that language in that second paragraph there.
The one, I agree with what you're saying, Paul, I absolutely do. But if we're in a situation where we need more ambulances, we also want to have the ability to pull more over without calling together a special meeting to do so. So if we had to add resources into this thing, we want to have the flexibility to do that as well. Now, to pull them out and say, hey, we're going to cut resources out, certainly that's a different discussion. But I think we want to have the agility to add resources when it's appropriate.
I think that I'd be comfortable if you added them sooner. I'm not disputing that. But in this language, there's nothing here in this language here that guarantees that as run volumes increase, there would be automatic triggers to add ambulances. And I think as we grow, that was one of the concerns I brought up at the last meeting, so.
Yeah, it
Sure,
is.
I agree, it's a good point. Kathy, Carl?
And, well, that would, it just would give some concrete objective factors that would trigger the increase.
The whole idea of the performance measures is more often not just going to be volume. It's going to be response times and use of mutual aid. And, so we'll be watching response times, and response times creep up, mutual aid creep up, then we'd be having a conversation with you about that. So that's what those key indicators about, not just purely volume. Well, maybe you can tell us what your considerations are, what triggers you to realize, oh, we need to increase our ambulances, and then we can put that type of language in the contract.
Yeah, so I think, so Bjorn Peterson, Medical Director for Lakeview EMS. Part of that is trying to quantify that number, and really what that number means, that run volume, is do we have enough resources to meet the performance metrics? The goal is to get an ambulance to the patient within a reasonable amount of time, whatever that time is decided on. So if we have 2 ambulances in the city, or let's say 3 ambulances in the city for X thousand runs, and it increases to X times or plus whatever, maybe those 3 ambulances can still maintain that response time of less than what's agreed upon. And so I would prefer that we use that, the response time metrics, some of the performance metrics, rather than an arbitrary number. Is that fair to say, John? I mean, that's my, my obligation here is to the citizens, the residents of Hudson, not necessarily to Lakeview EMS. I'm here to advocate for patient care. So for me, it's the response time that matters, not necessarily adding resources just because the run volume goes up. But if the run volume goes up and causes Lakeview to no longer be able to meet that response time because they don't have enough resources, I think that would be the trigger. And I think that's in the same spirit of what you're discussing.
It is. My difficulty is the 2 words sole discretion, because sole discretion doesn't indicate anything objective in terms of the metrics you're using or the number of.
Yeah,
I mean,
that we would insert.
If I could just break in here, I think you're right, okay? But I wouldn't get hung up on this relative to the language here, because they're just saying that they can increase if they feel they need to, without having to talk to us. It has nothing to do with whether we feel at some point in time that they need to increase, at which point would trigger some type of negotiation or whatever. This is, it's, maybe I'm not saying this correctly, but,
It's just
This is-
addressing increase.
yeah, it's just addressing if they feel at some point in time that they need to increase for a period of time, they have the ability to do that without talking to us. And you're talking about something completely different, I think, Paul, and that is, if we feel that there is a need that they increase, then we definitely need to be either talking to them, or there has to be some type of standard in place that would trigger that.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. And so I'm thinking that the sole discretion in here has nothing to do with what you're talking about. It's more with what they're offering to do.
I think, hey, you're correct. I understand exactly what you're saying, but we do need to add the sentence
Yep.
protecting our position.
Absolutely.
I
But
think
it is interesting that you say accommodate increasing run volumes in here, so you might want to change that to better the metrics that are more important.
So,
The last part of that sentence addresses that will be increased if performance standards are not being met. So it's those performance standards, that response time metrics, whatever else the council feels is important for us to be held to.
so does that make sense, Paul? That if, and it wouldn't be at their sole discretion if they're not meeting their standards, that we would.
their performance.
Yeah, we would.
And I don't know why, this is Ted Wegler, I'm president of the hospital, and I don't know why we couldn't say something that said, in collaboration or in conversation with the city. I mean, we certainly could do that. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. It's not just going to be us. We're going to be in conversation, watching those performance measures and making those decisions in conversation with you.
So we're going to, somewhere in here, we're going to be inserting an advisory council. And I would think that would probably be in
Right.
conjunction with discussions
And-
with that advisory council.
We have another section on here, Paul, that talks about the performance measures, and I
Yeah.
think might make you feel a little bit more comfortable that if we're not meeting those expectations that we've agreed upon between the two of us, that those are the performance measures we want to hit, if we have those locked in, then it is pretty clear whether we're hitting them or not.
Yeah, I want it to be objective, and I don't want it to be at the sole discretion, because that's a judgment thing that.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah.
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 My understanding from the paragraph, and correct me if I'm wrong, the paragraph that Paul's talking about, it's a little bit more of the fluidity of your staffing. It's not a permanency. In other words, we've grown as a community. We feel like we need to add another truck on a permanent basis in the rotation. That is, just to clarify, that's separate than this paragraph. Is this talking about the fluidity of just day-to-day, hey, we're not hitting our times or whatever, we need to add, but you're not talking about like specific adding another truck?
Yeah, I think, the intent here is, say you have like the hot air balloon festival kind of thing, or a marathon weekend that we know is going to be higher volume.
Right?
Can we add a third truck or a fourth truck if needed without having to convene an advisory committee meeting to get approval to do that?
And I would think our position is you can add
Yeah.
an additional truck anytime you feel the need to do that.
Right.
But I
But
think
if
what this is addressing more, I believe, is what's going to be based in Hudson and
Yes.
staffed
Well,
in
that's
Hudson
Paul's
on a
concern right now.
permanent
Yeah,
basis.
it's everybody's concern,
Yeah.
that's the one that Paul,
Yeah.
issue that Paul raised.
I just want to add to it, John Muller, EMS manager at Lakeview. There is no magic formula to when you pull those triggers. It's very hard to explain how you manage that permanent resource, because, if I look at our volumes year-to-date compared to last year during that same time frame, my response times are greater this year than they were last year. And why is it? Because of the weather. So we hadn't seen a winter like this in many years. It affected our response times. It didn't greatly affect them. It didn't put us over the edge on what a minimum requirement should be, or we didn't hit the maximum requirement, but they extended. So, when do you look at the volumes? And my suggestion would be that needs to be evaluated on an annual basis. Now, obviously, if we're hitting issues every month throughout the year, then we need to make some adjustments. And again, that's where, if there's an advisory board that we report to monthly, quarterly, whatever that is, we can always be ahead of that and make those plans. But, to just react if you miss it by a month, that you're talking about hiring staff and putting a permanent truck on. So, volume alone doesn't justify adding a resource. They could build a skilled nursing facility a block from the hospital that adds 100 calls a month into your plan, but if it's a block away and you're picking them up and going right back to the hospital, it's probably not going to change your overall response time. So that's why the formulas, there really is no formula on it. What we look at, again, is our overall response time over a period of times, and not just a month or 6 months, but you got to look at a year's worth of data to really get a good understanding of it. So I agree with you. It can be written different, but that's just kind of the idea behind making adjustments on the fly.
Do you have anything specific, Paul, that,
It's, I just think it has to be objectively spelled out. And I don't know what, you guys are the professionals, so I think you'd have to come up with those metrics. I don't know those metrics. But I do know as we grow that we need to have those metrics, because that's just for the safety of our people. And if the population increases and run volume increases and mutual aid increases, or however it works out, we have to make sure that we have something in the contract. It's a 10-year contract, from what I understand. So we're talking about 2029, and it very well could be there needs to be more ambulance service than two with the area that we have now. So I would just like to see that language spelled out.
I think as we get to that advisory committee, I listed in some elements that we typically review. We call them performance elements from our own service perspective. And I think those might help clarify some of that, Paul. So,
Okay.
not to jump around here, but.
No, I just,
let's
and
keep
I haven't had the
that-
benefit of reading the whole document. We just
Yeah,
got it, so
those-
you're ahead of me, so.
Whole section on performance elements there that might take.
Well, the
might take us a
performance
minute or
measurement?
two
Yeah.
to walk through.
Yeah, I think that's, so are we good, are we good right now on the service area?
On service area, yeah, but on the vehicles and staffing, there was, in the previous contract, you had planned on a supervisor with a chase, what we call a chase vehicle. Is that no longer part of the plan?
So we currently have, and I'll be careful what I call it, I'll refer to John on this, but we currently have a supervisor, or I'll call it a team lead in Hudson. And our intent is to keep that resource over here. I don't want to confuse that with a chase vehicle. They will go out on calls. It's like Bjorn will go out on calls from a medical
Right,
director
it's a different
perspective. but
purpose than the way we use it. We
Yes.
actually use it as a lead, try to use it as a lead vehicle.
Right.
And this, in fact, is a support to the team, to the,
Right, our goal
truck
is to
that's
get
there.
2 medics to the scene, not put a supervisor out there
Right.
to do that.
Right.
So, yeah, but there will be that resource in the community,
okay?
so.
Is that, I was surprised it wasn't under, I mean, the discussion of vehicles and
We
staffing,
don't,
is it somewhere
yeah,
else?
and we
or-
don't, I guess from my perspective, and John, I'll pull on you for this one, we don't consider them in our response. Does that make sense? They're not part of our response to the scene,
The team lead.
right? Just like John is not considered part of our response in the communities we serve and across the river.
So will there be that team lead and 2 paramedics permanently based in the Hudson?
We will have a leadership structure in Hudson, but I don't want that leadership person to be counted in our response to the scene. So I guess that would be an internal thing. Thoughts, John? I don't,
So currently, this is John Muller again. Currently, we do not have in our operation a permanent supervisor position, but it is slated for future development of our area. And the idea would be that we don't really have a base or anything for them to be permanently based out of in Stillwater, but when we build the new facility over here, it's an ideal time to put that resource in play. So our intent is that we will have a supervisor on the road, probably not 24/7. We don't know how that's going to look right now, but that would be to augment and assist the ambulance crews that are out there in the field. So they'll be mobile, but the idea is their office would probably be over here. Again, because we don't have room at Lakeview for that.
So you don't consider them as part of the response, but do you utilize that resource if
Yeah.
it warranted?
Yeah, so Matt and I both, Matt Milder and I both have response vehicles that are equipped. We don't consider that as that's not our normal deployment. But when things go bad
Okay.
or we're needed, that's what we're there for. The supervisors would have a different role. The supervisors would be out there going to calls. That would be their primary focus. It's to help oversight, evaluate the staff, and be there to assist them. Again, right now, we don't have that into our operation. So when we started the town of Hudson, we did a trial basis on that. So it was very successful. The crews liked having that extra set of hands there. So we implemented it when we did the town of Hudson, and we're working towards a permanent.
So you're talking 3 people?
Well-
Am I understanding it
Let's,
correctly?
Yeah,
let's just
5,
say you've
right.
defined the service area more or less. You know what's happening around us, and it's likely that if we enter into a contract with you, that North Hudson will, that Town of Troy will, what's all that gonna look like?
Again, the 2 full-time ambulances over here plus the resources we have on the other side of the river as needed,
You're going to have a supervisor here then, too?
and a supervisor
That's my
over
question.
here,
So there's supervisor,
yes.
okay.
And I want to clarify, Kathy, you're saying two
Two
plus,
paramedics plus
but
a
it's four.
supervisor.
It's four parameds,
Yeah.
2 trucks.
Oh, yeah, yep.
So it's
Got it,
5
yep.
total.
Right.
Right.
But not 24/7, we would have.
For the supervisor.
Yeah, yeah, our volumes, even though we're very busy, our volumes, like St. Croix EMS's, drop off in the evening. So, I mean, some evenings the crews are busy all night, but it's not to the point where we need to be adding any resources by any means.
At what point would you have a supervisor here? Would it be included with our contract, or would it be,
I gotta look at Nate for that
Well, I
answer.
don't know.
I'd like
guess-
to do it tomorrow if I can.
Well, it was specific in the contract under 3B, a very specific description of that, of the original contract. That's why I look at that, that's, I'm not seeing it here.
Right.
Again, it's a little bit apples and oranges. The previous contract was about bringing the two groups together and having kind of two different sort of combined operations. So it was just a different contract in a different context. So I think that's why we're a little off guard exactly what this would look like. But I think what we're thinking is we would be moving towards, and I think we probably need to have a little bit more conversation, when is the right time to do that? And I can tell you that we haven't decided that yet, and we can. And so we could do that before we're done with this process.
okay.
So I guess you could tell that we'd like that, and
Yeah,
now
yeah.
you can address how you want
Yeah.
to do that.
Exactly, Jim.
I think,
Exactly.
just to clarify, 2 ambulances, if we're just looking at the Hudson area, would not warrant a shift supervisor on the street I would not say in a contractual basis, but if you combine it with everything else that's going on with the Lakeview area to keep the trucks where they need to be to cover the area appropriately, then it does. So I don't know about putting it in the contract necessarily. That would be your decision and the lawyer's decisions. But I would just caution against trying to push for that for 2 ambulances in the city of Hudson. Does that make sense?
Well,
For you.
That's the,
I-
we heard 2 different
Yeah, we
things.
just
Yes,
heard
we
2
want to
different
have a
things.
We do,
supervisor,
we
and
do.
now, no, you don't need a supervisor.
But I'm just saying, in the context of a contract here for this area, does that make sense to have a supervisor built into that contract for the 2 ambulances?
well, and again, we've got a couple considerations here. Obviously, we are negotiating on behalf of the city, but we also understand that essentially we're negotiating for this entire service area right now. Right. Because if we enter into this contract, North Hudson will, Troy will. So we'd like to try to get some type of answer to this, given that, let's just presume we're going to have the entire service area as the way it was with St. Croix EMS. I thought the answer that I heard was that you would probably have a supervisor here at least during the daytime hours.
So I think the difference is, we're talking about putting 2 paramedics, 4 paramedics, and 2 ambulances into the service area. Nothing against John and Matt, but our primary objective is to get an ambulance with 2 paramedics to the scene. Having a supervisor in Hudson, to me, doesn't change that as our primary focus.
Right.
Adding leadership over here is important, and that's important from our perspective. But even in Lakeview, if John and Matt are both at all-day meetings somewhere, they're, I won't say of little value, they're not providing assistance to the scene.
Sure.
They provide leadership, and that's the important piece. Same with the city of Hudson. We have to have leadership over here, myself, Ted. But to put that as a response in the contract, I don't know what value that would add.
Again, you're saying that you're not counting that person as part of the whole
Correct.
response.
Right.
Right, and the other thing that I want to make clear too is the supervisor, although they could be housed over here, their office would be here, they will be responding to the service area. I mean, if something happens in Stillwater, they will respond to that as well. That's what a supervisor does. They're out, they're covering the whole service area. So As far as Hudson, we didn't include that in as our day-to-day operation, but it would augment the operation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so hearing that then, that is a point to be perhaps in a contract. I mean, if you're saying that that does augment response, I guess I'm hearing two different things.
So what I would, if, let's say for some reason, the Minnesota operation downsizes in the future, and now we have 1 ambulance in Stillwater and 2 ambulances in Hudson, would that still need a supervisor dedicated to cover those 3 ambulances, or could that be done with the leadership that's in place that's there during the business daytime hours? I'm probably not the person who should be speaking about the supervisory stuff, so I'm probably going to step back.
Let me just say that, this role was not in the RFP. And so this question, as you can see, has kind of taken us a little off balance. And just to be honest with you, we haven't had a conversation about exactly how this would look and exactly what the timeline would be and how our leadership structure would change over time. So I think, Jim, we'll take your question back, and we'll do some of our homework and report back, as opposed to try to figure it out right now, because it wasn't a part of this proposal or this RFP. So we hear your interest. We know you want some clarity around what the leadership will look like in Hudson. We'll take that back, and we'll come back with a recommendation. Is that fair enough?
Sure.
That's good.
It was also included under 10 high acuity cases. There's specific references to that supervisor being available for those calls. So it's kind of, you talk about service area, but the service area we defined, we're talking this region that we've always covered through St. Croix EMS. But now you're talking about service area, okay, that goes to North St. Paul. So in John's description of it. So I just want to I think we were real clear, very, very clear about what kind of resources are going to be on covering basically the Wisconsin side, and as opposed to the Minnesota side. I'm differentiating, and to a large degree, saying, yeah, that's kind of a different. I look at it as a different base of operations, smaller than the other one, but it's kind of a different base of operations.
All right. Anything else on the vehicles and staffing?
I do have one more thing, and clarification. I guess it was one of the questions that I asked earlier on in the process. Just to clarify, your shift changes, where people are reporting for duty, would be in the city of Hudson?
Yes.
Would be at that base of operations?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, we're going to hold off on dispatch, billing, and collections.
It's all the responsibility of Lakeview, as
Yep.
far as I understood it.
Are there any issues with this? We're good with it? Okay. Performance elements?
Where'd you jump to, Rich?
Pardon me?
Performance measurement.
Performance
the bottom.
measurement.
Can I ask you, Nathan, about that? So it says Lakeview will maintain a fractile response time of 8 minutes and 59 seconds for emergent 911 calls requiring lights and siren. So can you explain, so it's fractiles, so can you explain when it starts? So when does this
So let me clarify.
8:59 start?
Let me clarify too. There's a typo in there. It's 9:59, and this is fractile. So I'm going to let John talk about what fractile means, and there may be questions about that. And I don't know, John, if you have enough of these documents to, because we want to make sure you understand what this means. We've talked averages for 2 years. Fractile's different.
I talked about, a couple of years ago when we were here, we referred to everything as fractile, and people were very confused by that terminology, so this time around, we changed it to talk about averages, because people were more used to averages. So really, in the EMS industry, our performance measures for the bigger high-performance EMS agencies out there, they look at fractile response times, meaning you're going to respond to all of your calls within 90% of the time this number, whatever that number is decided on. That number is different throughout the United States, but the national average is in a metro area, there's averages between 8 minutes and 59 seconds, and then 10 minutes. So that's kind of the difference there. There's urban area, and then there's metro area. So an example of that would be in Hennepin County. Hennepin County has a county ordinance that fractile time is 10 minutes. So, which means that 90% of the time, the EMS agencies will make all of their calls within 10 minutes. So they'll be on scene 10 minutes or less, 90% of the time. That's fractile. So 100%, if you were going to try and achieve 100%, it's unachievable because of the financial burden that it would put on any service to try and accomplish 100% response time in that time frame. The difference between that and average is if you take average, you're looking at a 8-minute average response time, half of that 8 minutes is, or half of the time you're over that 8 minutes. So the fractile makes it more of a realistic response time and puts more pressure on the provider to meet those performance elements. Does that make sense?
Yes, but it didn't answer my question, which is, when does the clock start?
I'm sorry, Paul, I did not hear that. Again, for us, it's when when our pagers go off, when we're notified.
Okay.
And that's in any system. I don't know of any system out there that measures it any different.
Yeah.
for
I
your
just wanted to
response
clarify
time. Yeah.
I want to make sure we're on the same page in
Yep,
terms of
when
the
we're
numbers.
notified.
And you're looking for feedback on this? Am
Well,
I
I'm
right?
not looking for feedback. I wanted you to see that.
Yeah.
But you're more than welcome to give feedback on it.
Well, just my initial reaction is that is way too long of a response time. I'm not comfortable with a 9-minute and 59-second fractile response time.
In which area?
I would agree if that's what that meant. That this just means
Because-
90% of the calls will be within that time
So,
limit.
yeah,
It doesn't look at average time or how it might vary.
So, John, I'm
depending
gonna-
on how far away.
Sorry, Jim.
So, I agree with you. I have some discomfort in that being the sole measurement.
Yeah, and also, John, it seems to, don't let me put words in your mouth, so tell me if I'm wrong. At the last council meeting, or two meetings before, I think it was the 5-hour marathon meeting, I should call it. I specifically asked for an average runtime for 6 minutes or less for the city of Hudson, and you specifically told me yes. And now I'm seeing 9:59 as and that's just for 90% of the calls. That, to me, is not what we were informed with that meeting. That's not, to me, that's not accurately reflecting what you said at that meeting. And to me, 9:59 is a not acceptable number when you have a 7.4 square mile area called the city of Hudson, and you're supposedly having ambulances based at the hospital. I mean, I understand you're maybe trying to create room for flexibility, and this ambulance is coming from here and this ambulance is coming from there, which I understand because you can get 2 calls or multiple calls at the same time, so I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying from my perspective, a 9-minute and 59 runtime for a city of our size, that's not acceptable.
Well, so what my response to you at the 5-hour council meeting was, we're talking average response times, and you asked if I believe that we could achieve that, and I said, yes, we could. So if we're looking at averages, again, that's where this document shows you the averages, but then when you put it in fractile response time, that's what you get.
I guess what I'm saying is, if there's a contract, I am not voting for it unless there's a less 6-minute or less response time within the city of Hudson.
Paul,
So I would not bring up the language of fractiles. I would focus on what is the average response time.
Paul, again, what we're trying to use is standard, evidence-based, best practice measurement, and that is the use of fractile. That is what is used in the industry. And so we could certainly put both in there, but it seems to me to have a contract that's not using the best practice industry standard for response time measurement, that just doesn't seem right either. So maybe we needed to put both in there and be watching both of those. But if fractile is what is used around the country for response times, why would we use something different or not use it and average? You see what I mean?
I do see what you mean, but I think that 10% that it's not, the fractiles is the 90%, right? So 10%, it's not including. And I'm really concerned about the 10% that you could have an ambulance coming from well into Minnesota, that it's not going to help our people. You have to understand, our job is to protect our people. And so I'm just being honest with you guys. I have a problem with being told at one meeting, we can do this in 6 minutes, and now I'm being told we need 9:59 based on some other measuring system. And to the average citizen, Mr. Mayor, that's not playing consistent. And so I do have a problem with that.
I think I think it's two different things though, Paul.
Right.
And I haven't heard anything different. It's a difference between the average that they actually, you can see the average time, response time, and it is different than the fractile time. I'd also point out, take a look at the Hudson fractile time right now. All right, and apparently that's been acceptable.
I don't have those numbers. What I have from,
It's right here.
what I have from St. Croix, up here you're talking about? I thought you were talking about St. Croix. You talking about, is this for town of Hudson?
And this is us responding from Lakeview to Hudson.
Yeah,
That's the town of
clarification on
Hudson,
that.
sorry?
Yeah.
Ted pointed that out to me. Those are actually the transfers in 2018. We weren't in the town of Hudson, so that number 160, or 161 is the transfers out of Hudson. So that just shows you our response time from Stillwater to Hudson Hospital is what those are. And we're not, I'm not saying,
I think we need to have a better explanation of fractile. Okay, I think it just, because we're talking about two different things here. And let me ask this, is there a, as far as industry standards for fractile response time, is there, like, before you guys are looked at by the state of Minnesota for your fractile response, what is that measure? At what point do they say that fractile is just too high?
So there is no state oversight of fractile response times in either Minnesota or Wisconsin.
None. Is there a standard?
There is. So the National Fire Protection Agency, the NFPA Standard 1710, which technically governs career departments, which I would argue Lakeview EMS is, that the fractile response would be 8 minutes and 59 seconds, 90% of the time. And that's in an urban area such as Hudson. It actually goes up from there when you get into rural areas, which we could argue, the town of Hudson is getting into the suburban, maybe not the rural, but 8:59 is the nationally accepted standard with the NFPA.
Okay.
that goes up to 15 minutes.
Yeah, for the rural, it's up to, and that's fractile. So, Paul, I think I understand the concern. This was something that is very difficult for me to wrap my brain around too. The reason they use fractile is actually to protect the citizens that are receiving the service. If you're using an average response, again, if we're saying 6 minutes as the average response, that means 50% of those calls are going to be longer than 6 minutes.
That's right.
So I don't remember off the top of my head, but there's differences between the two where they're not perfect. One of them, you can have pockets within the city that are always going to have those longer response times that aren't captured by that metric. In the other case, you're going to have just longer response times that aren't going to be captured by the metric because of the way it's being calculated. But if you'd like, I could get a better definition of the difference between fractile and average, if that would help.
No, I get it. If I'm correct, tell me if I'm wrong, 90% of the calls would be 10 minutes or less under what's stated here.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm trying to tell you is that's not an acceptable response rate for a town of 7.4 square miles if the ambulance is coming from within it. I need to see a lot lower numbers before I could support that in a contract.
So I would, are you talking fractile or average?
I
6
just said
minutes-
90% of the calls would be 10 minutes or less, according to the language here. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I'm telling you that in a town of our size, 10 minutes is way too long, even if that's 90% of your responses.
So what if we were if we were to not talk about fractile and just talk about average? I mean, that's what you asked them.
Well, I'm using their numbers, and I have to be honest, this makes me a lot more nervous than I was before.
But their average response time is different than their fractile.
I get that.
Significantly different.
I
And
get
if they were
that.
just to talk about, and they answered your question about average response time, and if they feel that they can do average response time in 6 minutes,
Yeah, that's going to have to be reworked. I mean, that's
So we can.
people in this town deserve better than a 10-minute response time.
But,
Well, I think they're going to
if we use average,
misunderstand
though, I
that
think
number.
you put yourself at a little bit of a risk using average. I just want to make sure you understand that. That
Yeah.
if we use that as wording, that is going to leave a large portion of the runs that are beyond that 6 minutes as the standard that we're held to. So if you understand that, that's fine. But I just want to make sure that we're on the.
I would say, if anything, we have to have both.
Yeah, that's
both
what,
numbers.
yeah,
Right.
that's what I'd say, Jim.
But I would also be much more comfortable if I knew you were looking at the distribution of the data. I did this stuff at 3M, so that was what, we played with numbers a lot, and so, but then, and the other, there's two pieces of it. One is you're looking at distribution, and the average, or mean, or mode, or whichever one of those numbers you want to use. But you're also looking at the 10% that go beyond that, and say, why did those go beyond that fractile? About 90%. Those are the outliers that you'd be doing a continuous improvement process on. And I'm assuming that you guys do that. And it would really, that's part of your process when you look at your numbers on a monthly or quarterly basis. You're saying, okay, why were these 6 out here at 18 to 20 minutes? What happened on those?
And not only that, but also if that's happening, is it the same part of the city? Is it, let's say, the northwest part of the city that we're not getting to consistently in that time frame? Is there a way that we need to look at redeploying one of those trucks or repositioning things so that we're more fairly covering the entire city? And that plays into that too.
Or maybe you can't ever get there
Right.
because of
Some
the road
areas are-
system,
yeah,
you can't ever
if
get
there's only
there.
one way in and it's a spiral all the way into the middle, yeah, you can't
Yeah,
help that.
yeah.
But at least we know that would be the case if
Yeah,
we.
and that's, the other thing was interesting, I went back and reviewed the report that River Falls did on themselves, and I'd seen this before, didn't pay much attention, but they had kind of rings, time response rings around this, and they're not quite, obviously they can't be concentric, and I don't know how they got them, but I thought that's a really neat approach to say this is, because you have several goals in. Within this ring, we have to be 4 minutes. Within this ring, we're 7 minutes, so, and I think it kind of covers the situation that you have here. You've got a high concentration of 15,000 people within a few miles, within 7 square miles, and then you've got another 15,000 that are way out there somewhere. So it was a really interesting approach, and I don't know if the data was even valid, but I said, wow, that's if you had that.
Yeah.
I agree.
That's your
that
operation
10 minutes, for me, if I lived in Hudson, that sounds like a very long time to be waiting for an ambulance. I completely agree with that for the small size that Hudson is. So I would entertain,
I would just say, if you look at 1,500 responses in the city of Stillwater, average response time on 1,500 calls was 5 minutes and 4 seconds. But the fractile response time was 8 minutes and 17 seconds. So, it demonstrates exactly the point that John is trying to make, the difference between fractile and average. And I think it's a real good example of what would most likely be happening here.
that number was in there just as the NFPA, nationally accepted standard, but that doesn't mean that that's what we have to or you have to hold us
Well,
to.
correct.
And if you guys want to use it, I would suggest then that if it's 8 minutes and 17 seconds in Stillwater, that the fractile, we would bring that fractile down from 9:59 to 8 minutes. Because there's just too much room right now. If we're actually smaller than Stillwater, so I would expect the times to be,
I'm not clear, is it 8:59 or 9:59? What you
It was
intended?
9:59 is what Nate and I talked about. Again, we based that off of the largest county in the state of Minnesota, meaning Hennepin County has a response time of 10-minute fractile. So
That's
we
awesome.
based it on that. And the thing I want to just clarify, Paul,
yeah.
is I don't think there's a service around that's going to agree to a 6-minute response time in a city this size. It's not going to happen. You can't set us up for failure.
Well, your RFP that you gave us said an estimated 5 to 7 minutes. So I'm using the
Average-
numbers, I'm
yep.
using the numbers that you gave us in your RFP.
Yep, average response.
Yeah.
Average response. And again, if you look at the average on there in North St. Paul and in Stillwater, we're hitting that 5 minutes or 6 minutes or less, I'll say, because I don't have it in front of me.
Right, so
But fractile, look
but-
at the difference in fractile.
But the difference in fractile is not as much. It says North St. Paul, 7 minutes, 33 seconds. They're under 8 minutes in fractile. Stillwater says 8 minutes and 17 seconds. All of a sudden, we're turning around to Hudson and we're saying it's a 10-minute fractile. And I'm saying that is not acceptable. If you can do this in North St. Paul and Stillwater and you want to serve our people,
Yeah.
then that fractile is going to have to come down to 8 minutes.
And do you,
looking for-
what do you guys have today? How does that work today?
I don't even know if we do fractiles.
Yeah, we do. I think we have to.
I don't know.
The way I'm looking at it is comparable service area, comparable base, it should be treated equally. Hudson shouldn't be treated 2 minutes slower on a fractile just because it's a new service area.
Again, I looked at the North St. Paul contract for the Stillwater contract, but, and so the difference between how we performed in 2018 in this 1 year is going to be the standard for the next 10. I mean, so a little bit of room there, I think, does make sense. And if you were, let's say, go to 8 minutes and 59 second fractile, which is an industry standard that we could live with, it's going to get you the average response time they can live with. I think we're getting pretty close then, Paul, so I think we let us circle back on that, okay? Does that make sense, though, maybe something like that?
Yeah.
Close the gap, anyway.
Yeah, I'm just saying as written
Yep.
here, I'm not comfortable with
Got it.
that. But if you want to come back with some new numbers, I'm
Yeah.
happy to look at them.
Got it.
And
We just didn't,
I can't
you don't
find it
want to
right now.
set the bar as low as it can possibly go. I think, again, you're just setting yourself up for failure, but I'm very confident that we're going to meet based on historical data, but we can't set the bar at the lowest historical data, because then what's the consequence if we fall below that? You said earlier that we need to add resources to it. How, if you're setting the bar as low as it could go, and we don't meet that, then we have to add resources. We'd never be able to afford to do that. No service would be able to afford to do that. So you got to have a little buffer in there. It doesn't mean that's, we can sit back and wait 2 or 3 minutes longer before we decide to go en route. You got to have some leeway. You're dealing with weather conditions, road conditions, all of those things that none of us can predict from day to day. So you got to have some room there. And again, if you look around the country, what's going on, we're not trying to be outside that.
I had a question for you. Sorry. I guess I'm kind of bringing it back to when we were talking about service area. Does the fractile response that you're proposing for the city of Hudson, does the entire area play into the number that you arrived at?
Yes,
Okay.
of the city of Hudson, the entire city.
The fractile response of 959,
Yes.
is that
Are you talking about Belgium, North Hudson, and Troy, or just?
Yeah, like you built that timing in, is that built on the presumption that the entire service area?
It's built on the current St. Croix EMS's service area, is my thought. When I told Nate that's what our response time should be, it's built on that. So that, yes, you're right, that includes the village in North Hudson, the city limits of Hudson,
That's different.
and Troy.
That's not what our handout here says. It says a service area is intended only for the city of Hudson. So I'm assuming that anything in this language and contract is only intended for the city of Hudson. This is what you're telling us. We just agreed that the service area was the city of Hudson, and that other municipalities will be required to develop their additional contracts. So I can only make the assumption that the fractile times are in the service area, which is the city of Hudson.
That's fine.
I think that, this
Then it
is
might change, is what I would think.
obviously
Talking about, this
gonna-
is built on serving the rural
Again, this is a
area.
conversation about expectations, and we hear you loud and clear.
Yeah.
And I don't see any reason that, the way we divide this out, this is how we look at data. We don't treat Somerset and outer reaches of our service area the same as we do Stillwater or North St. Paul. So this is useful, not applying the same lens to the entire service area, but we're going to look at the town of Hudson probably separate from the city of Hudson when we do our performance review. Similar to this.
Right.
And
You have a
and you're
nine-
right, to your
That
point,
makes
Paul,
sense, yeah.
those should be different, right?
What's that?
Those should be different.
Right, no, yeah.
We're a lot closer here than we are to the snowpark.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's
Right.
Yeah.
why I wanted to point out Stillwater versus, Grant. It's
Yeah.
Right.
apples
And
and
Jim
oranges
brings
as
up a
far as.
good point. You
Right.
got to look at your data. You got to look at the outliers. We look at the outliers every day.
Right.
And you're spot on. That's why you do this. So,
Yeah.
The other thing, just one last thing on the performance measure, as you've seen from us, we will show you every single call from when the point was received. You've seen the mountains of data. We can show you and will show you very transparently every single call. So there's no secrets. We're not hiding anything. You know exactly what every call did. And I think that will really help drive this conversation in the future about when do we need another ambulance, if we need another ambulance, that kind of thing.
And you do that currently with the town of Hudson on a monthly basis, is that correct?
we've agreed to do that on a quarterly basis, but I think
Quarterly?
John is doing it monthly in the initial onset. We want to make sure that they're comfortable with what the performance metrics are. And John, you can maybe talk about how that goes.
Since the passing of Jeff Johnson and Liz Moline took over up there, she was new to the process and just asked me to come to that first meeting that she was at, which would have been our first meeting we did a report to. And then the next meeting, I said I'd be more than welcome to come back the next meeting. We've been there 3 months, all 3 months of their meeting. We reported at the end of March, so we reported twice in March because the meetings changed because of the election, so. But in the contract, we said quarterly or as needed. So monthly gets, I mean, if you're talking about a lot of communities, that could get pretty time consuming to put everything together every month. So quarterly would be ideal. But I think as you guys need, if there's concerns that come up, you call us and say, we need you to come in. And that's kind of what we've been doing in the town of Hudson.
Yeah, the last thing I was going to say was that the town of Hudson, you had the 9-minute and 59-second fractile time, so it's kind of, it can't be that for Hudson.
Yeah.
It just can't.
Right.
And we'll clarify that in the language. I think Kathy picked up already on my typo in there, so I think we'll a little bit more work around the fractile response. And appreciate your concerns.
And putting average as well as fractile into it, what are your thoughts on that? Or did we decide on that?
You know, I'm just thinking out loud here, as we get to the performance metrics and we talk through what those are,
Okay.
even, I understand with the statistics, but I appreciate an average response time in there too. So it just gives you a little different way to look at it.
And I'm thinking, how do I explain this to, my neighbor? Right? When you're talking fractile and we've been looking at averages.
I would also maybe encourage you to consider how the advisory committee can hold Lakeview accountable to some of these so that this isn't a 10-year plan that maybe this needs to go down after 3 years. Maybe the response time, whatever, we can't predict, but how can the advisory committee help establish these standards and hold Lakeview accountable so that there's a more opportunity for quality improvement, performance improvement on an ongoing basis, not just one time here at the start of a 10-year phase?
All right, so we'll hear more on that when we get together next time. First responders, you guys have said that you will coordinate with any type of first responder program that we put in place. Is that right? So first responders, other than that, I don't know that need to be in the contract because first responders is something that we're going to have to put together. That's on us.
Outside of the licensure of.
Yeah, licensure and training.
Licensure training.
Training and supplying.
Cost of it.
I think you said.
Those
you'd-
are articulated in those.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's something to that too. There is with a first responder group, there is a liability risk or accountability of the municipality to hold that liability. So in the town of Hudson holds the liability insurance on the first responders that's required to have that program. And I have no idea what that is because I don't have to deal with that. So, but there is, under the state statute, someone has to have the liability insurance to cover those responders.
And that is not what would be under Lakeview would not want to do that in a contract.
We've
Is that correct?
We've not ever done that
From a
before.
liability
It's usually the municipality that takes care of the liability piece of that.
Okay,
In all the communities that we operate in, that's how that's done.
gotcha. I have a question on things like Narcan use by our police officers. Is there, from an equipment standpoint, from a supply standpoint, is that something that we can work with Lakeview on?
Yeah, and currently today, we supply all of our first responders with the equipment that they need, other than the durable medical equipment, AEDs that, have a 10-year lifespan. Most of those are purchased through grant funding and different resources. We don't supply that to the first responders.
Got it.
So I know that Town of Hudson gets a lot of their stuff from the Hospital Foundation, and I've already talked to the Hospital Foundation in regards to keeping that program going, and at this point, they're very welcome to that. I think those are the biggest cost items are the AEDs.
Mhm.
I can't think of anything else, can you?
What about the Narcan?
Yeah,
A
so
little bit more on that.
So like the Narcan, the other supplies, we supply them with the initial, their initial needs, and then we replace them as they use them. So some will do that actually when they're on scene. They'll just tell the medics, we used, a non-rebreather mask and something else, and then we replace them. Currently, right now, none of our first responders are carrying any medications, but the Narcan is the new one that we do supply most of our law enforcement agencies with that. So we are acquiring that for them and then getting it to them.
From a financial piece as well as a physical piece?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is good. I think the organizational piece of it belongs to us and how we do that, who it is and where it is and how we work with the region.
Right.
Right.
So,
It's probably outside of this.
yeah,
Type
we
of
might
meeting.
want some advice, but
Right.
I sort of
It's not part of the contract.
started kicking around some ideas this morning and actually think came up with a structure that might be really attractive, so
Cool.
I'll share that outside of this meeting.
Okay.
I was just going to mention, Bill, that I think the underlying concept there is that if the first responders didn't use the equipment, we would have used the equipment when our paramedics showed up. So either
Oh,
way, you know what I
right.
mean?
Yeah.
So it's just a in-kind exchange because
Sure.
we would have used it anyways.
That's a good point.
And Jim, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that even if the community is organized first responders, we support that. And we'll be right there with you to support it. We can't.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm looking for
Yep.
the medical side of it and the disposal piece coming from you guys, because we can't do that.
Right.
But we could do it at great
From the
expense.
training
but,
and the support,
yeah.
and yeah, we have that obligation too, so.
But organizationally and scheduling and names and perhaps contact, figure out how the communications piece, that may belong to us.
Yeah, yeah.
We good?
Yeah, it looks good. I appreciate that piece in there.
All right, community relations, special event coverage.
So my only question on this one, and I think I brought it up at the marathon meeting, can you guys,
Why do you keep referring to it?
Yeah.
was the
over, Paul.
was the
It's
5-hour marathon?
I was tired too.
I've had many marathons.
The tape is still running.
Randy's not here, so someone has to try to add some humor. Okay, just, can you clarify the fire piece? Because that was my question, and I think it's already in there, but I'm not familiar enough with the language to know where that fits under.
Yeah, so currently today, with all of our services that we work with, we respond to any structure fire. We dedicate an ambulance to that fire until we're cleared by the fire chief or the incident commander of the situation. We also do the same in any law enforcement type cases where they have a need for an ambulance to stand by there. That, again, is very common practice. We do it hundreds of times a year. You guys have the data in your stuff, how many times we did it last year.
Right.
There's a couple of different levels to that coverage. The ambulance crew gets there, does an assessment with the incident commander and determine what the needs are. Sometimes it might require a second ambulance there. So we have one that's dedicated to providing rehab and assistance to the fire crews that are going in and out of the fire. And the other one is available if they actually pull someone out and just need to leave, so we always have one available there. It really varies on the size of the fire. Probably almost all of our situations, Matt or I are also at any of those structure fires to be that face-to-face contact with the incident commander.
I think what I'd like to point out, though, is the fire coverage is not what is being referred to in this community relations piece. This would be football games, community events, parades,
That's a
that kind of
separate
thing.
one.
Yeah.
I
But
didn't see where it
per
was
that
at.
point, I wonder, do you want us to capture some language around our
Yes.
policy related to fire?
This is-
Yeah, for
That's what I'm
sure.
hearing, yeah.
Well, and the reason I'm saying it, Ted, is that I looked at the contract from 2 years ago,
Yeah,
and it was very vague in that contract. It didn't really say like, the crew will stay on until dismissed by the
Yeah,
chief.
like
kind of
John
stuff.
just described.
Exactly. So
Okay.
I'm comfortable with the language John just
Yeah,
used, but
yeah,
I just
we-
want to see that in the.
we can do
Yeah.
that. That's our policy.
Yep.
Was there a question on the community event type coverage? That varies too. I'll just explain it for clarification purposes. Any of the community type events, like we have 5K races and different things that occur almost every weekend in our service area. And we always will put a resource with that event. Sometimes it means we just take one of our on-duty trucks that's the normal daily deployment, and we just position them at the event. And we base that a lot of times on what the event is, the number of participants they have in it. If it's a large event, we a lot of times will err on the side of staffing an extra ambulance for that event. Give you an example, Hot Air Affair, not our event, but it was our first year in the town of Hudson, did not know what to expect. That day we staffed a shift lead person that was over here all day, and we had 2 ambulances here all day till 8 o'clock at night because of the parade. So again, those are the things that we do to make sure that our day-to-day operation, we always have to function around our 911 response and what historical data is on that. And if an event comes to town, we want to augment it because we don't want the event to tap into our 911 resources. Does that make sense? So we're always augmenting our staffing coverage based on the event.
Now,
When do
those-
we charge for that? Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, go ahead. I think
When,
you're-
when we charge for that is if the event is a for-profit type event. Again, the examples of that are the big concerts in Somerset. Those are national performers coming here. They have budgets. They need X number of ambulances on site. We need them 24 hours a day. They know that they have to pay for that. They have to pay for law enforcement coverage. They have to pay for fire coverage. So we do charge our expenses to do that coverage. Football games and community type things, we do that in kind.
John,
That
I
was-
think it's important to describe what happens. If we have an ambulance,
Once at the football game,
Yeah.
and there is a serious critical incident 3 blocks away, I think it's important to understand what happens, and
Yeah.
that's some of the language here, but unless there's no question, I do think it'd be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, life threat situations, anytime you have an ambulance positioned somewhere that's in a standby type event, and a life threat call comes in, am I saying that right?
Yeah. that's-
Cardiac arrest is the big one. As long as that ambulance resource is not committed to, I'm going to use a fire standby. If they're not committed there where we don't have actual firefighters in the ambulance being looked at right now and someone has a cardiac arrest a block away, our dispatch would send that ambulance to it and we immediately move another ambulance to the event. Football games is a perfect example of that coverage. Remember, the state of Wisconsin, it is a requirement for high school level football that an ambulance be on site. But in most communities, they only have one ambulance, and they cover those events with one ambulance. Well, a football player gets hurt, say they break a leg, an arm, they get transported to the hospital. Now who's covering the event? So again, in our system, we move our coverage. So that, in our dispatch, before the event, we tell our dispatch, this is a dedicated event. And what that means to our dispatch is if that ambulance gets moved for any reason, either transporting a patient or respond to a life threat call that they're closest to, automatically another ambulance is dispatched to that event. That's different than how other services operate within the state. Again, that's built into our dispatch center.
You talk about, in that first paragraph under community relation, right, Lakeview EMS will provide no additional charge, dedicated within the city at high school football games, non-dedicated standby coverage at city-sponsored community events and health fitness events. But you did say you charge for profit. We do have events commonly in the city that are nonprofit, that are not necessarily city-funded. Would you be opposed to adding nonprofits into there?
Again, of all the events we do in the last 5 years, the only one that's ever got billed for it are the big concerts. Even Lumberjack Days, that's a group of business people that are putting this event on. I think they made themselves a 501c3. We've not charged them for those events. We augment our coverage, we move a truck there, and we cover it. So, again, the only example I have is the concerts in Somerset that we charge for.
Sure.
So, again, we would do that.
Okay. I think I would like to see that if you're willing to put that in there.
Yeah, and
Just adding
we could have
nonprofits.
language that just says Lakeview will charge for private for-profit events.
Oh, yeah, that might be, yeah.
And add the city-sponsored or non-profit-sponsored community.
That I would feel comfortable with.
So some of that too, as we're thinking it through here, or I should say I'm thinking it through here, there are some times that, event will say, we're required by our insurance company to have an ambulance dedicated to our event. And again, I take those in a case-by-case situation, but dedicated means they're required by their insurance carrier to have an ambulance or have that resource there. They could be a 501c3. Most times we don't do it, but I don't want to get locked into something if someone's going to come, and, you know, that should be something we should be charging for, because their demands are higher than anyone else's would be. What I would like to do is we've had a lot of help from the village of Hudson, village of Somerset has helped us a lot in working with these promoters. Most of these promoters, we're tracking them down a year and a half later, 2 years to get paid on it. So the village of Somerset has put it in their conditional use permit that we work together as a team. When you do those conditional use permits, if that's a part of it, it needs to be part of the conditional use permit, that EMS needs to be contacted and approved. City of Stillwater, every event that happens in the city of Stillwater, I get the application sent to me. So it goes to me, the police chief, the fire chief, and the other city leaders, and we just all reply back. I have no issues with the permit.
And I think it would be appropriate for somebody from Lakeview, should we go into this contract, to be a part of that sort of public safety meeting
Yeah,
that happens on a
absolutely.
monthly basis.
Yep.
Do you, for your event, need an ambulance? That way, all the cards are on the table.
Well, we have a special event permit process that goes within the city, would go to the law enforcement, public safety.
Yeah.
And if we contract with you,
Yeah.
we don't call it conditional use, it's special event. You would see, it ends up being a pretty thick
Yes.
kind of thing,
Sure.
say garbage, power,
Yeah.
safety, all
Yeah,
that stuff.
exactly what the
But
city
I
of
would-
Stillwater does.
So it would, we would include Lakeview in that
Absolutely.
circulation.
I just would like to see visibility of that from, a meeting standpoint. I mean, those permits are coming through, but we're still vetting that through the Public Safety Committee.
We don't really have that much here. I mean, anything of any great size. We've got the booster days, we've got hot air affair, this Rotary thing that's gonna happen is gonna have, 500 tickets they sold, so that'll be a couple thousand people. We have in the park with the Minnesota Orchestra that comes in, 3,000 people, something like that. And those are all not-for-profits,
Yeah,
right? But those are the ones we know about.
right.
And the only other place I can see us having any type of big event of any consequence is going to be over at the dog track with that ball field, because they are planning on having concerts and stuff there.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind.
Yeah. And again, if we can work with the city and sit down with you guys, and you guys are in agreement,
What?
You're okay with their type of coverage that they're asking for, and that's where, a lot of times the city of Stillwater will reach out to me and say, hey, are you okay with this, their emergency plan? And that's what we want to do. We want to work with you guys and, not be in our own silos doing it, because we're all in it for the same reason and what's best for our community.
Yeah,
That would be my recommendation.
absolutely.
All right, termination clause.
Carl, are you still on?
I am, yes.
You guys, just checking.
This is language from the
Town of Hudson contract?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so again, we're not beholden to this, and I'm even wondering if we're locked into this and whether 120 days is enough for you or us, depending on who want to get out of the relationship sometime way down the road. Wouldn't give you enough to put together a backup. It wouldn't be enough for us to probably manage some of the personnel things if, so I think we need to have a little conversation about what is the right window of time to give each other enough time to manage a transition like this.
Is a 1 year short enough?
To me, it is. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not looking at it as much for our
Right.
protection, although
Right.
that's important,
Right.
because I'm not intending on going backwards.
Right.
But I think there does have to be more than 120 days now that we think through it. Ted and I were talking about it. That's a short window. That goes quick.
And the town of Hudson, were, is a smaller everything, and so I'm a little easier to manage. And again, I'm not even saying what it should be, I'm just saying it's probably something we need to have a little bit more conversation about, that's all.
And I would actually be comfortable with Carl and Kathy coming up with something that you feel from a
Yeah.
legal perspective is
Well,
reasonable.
legal is one thing, but I want a comfort level here too.
Right.
So I can't see anything short of a year.
Shorter, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, I would even beg to say
For the city to be turned,
Yeah. I
For
mean,
any
that-
have to
termination.
get something going.
2 years.
two
potentially.
maybe, yeah.
I mean,
But I mean, so I just, if, in the event that, I think that the only way, from what I've heard, that we would consider termination if we entered into this contract is perhaps they're not meeting their standards. Something else comes up like that, and we say, you know what, that's enough. Is 2 years too long if they're not meeting their standards?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
I would think so as well. But a year, I think it would take us a year probably to get up and
Another service.
either contract with another service or embark once again on our own.
Right.
You may want to have different notice periods depending upon
Right.
the reason for the termination. So if we're not satisfying performance standards, maybe it's a year. If there is a desire for either party to terminate without any cause, maybe it's a 2-year term. So that's something to consider too.
I would agree with that.
All right, that makes sense. Leave that up to
Let's
the,
think it through.
the
Yeah, I
attorneys.
need a little time to think through the various
Because
scenarios.
what is cause, right?
Well, and there may be some reason, and I don't know what it would be, that's, that the city would, 2 years is a long time to stay with a service that you're not,
Right.
or it's not working. So I think it's good to have this discussion, but we can talk
But if we
it
had
through.
something that was with cause, that was a year, and without cause at 2 years, that I would feel comfortable with.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and that comes, also brings in the oversight committee. I think we had if they're not meeting their performance standards or there's concerns, the committee can require them to come up with a remediation plan. So there might be some time in there just to work it through. But, yeah, let's
There are a
give it a
couple,
little more
I can think
thought.
of a couple of reasons, or at least one that I wrote down, why we would want to say maybe we want out of this is for, and I know you guys don't anticipate this, but if something happened and Lakeview EMS, you decide that they go private, then it's a whole new world. But that would be certainly something we'd take very seriously. So that's an example of something we can't imagine, but it needs to be covered in the language.
Right.
The scope of the organization changes, the structure, the direction,
Well,
things like
we
that.
would have a contract in place that would
It
still
will, right.
specify, well, what the service parameters are,
Yeah.
regardless of the
So just a few words to-
organizational structure.
We still have to perform under any structure.
Yeah, right, whether they're, yes.
Existing contracts.
Yeah.
But I think we need to look at something different than 120 and just,
And
Carl and I
is
can
that
talk
something
about that.
Carl,
Yep, we can
Yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, river coverage, I think we've already taken care of that. Anything else that we need to talk about there?
I haven't read it yet.
So let me, I put that on there because it had come up a few times, and I don't know if you guys remember even bringing it up, but just how are we going to respond to the river? It's been in the contract. It has been something that over the year I've heard. So I put it in here, just what we do when we respond to the water, how we currently operate there. Not that it necessarily is contractual, a contractual element per se, but just so you guys are clear and comfortable with what we do to respond to incidents on the river, because that is a big part of what we do, especially if the water ever calms down here.
Yeah. What it's saying is you're not going to have a boat ambulance of your own. So
But-
you'll have your equipment, but you need us to provide transport.
Right, and we partner with all agencies up and down the river. I think this would put us into about a 21-mile stretch of water, maybe even more. So we want to make sure that we partner with all the agencies up and down the river to put medics where they need to be.
Seems just makes it clear.
Yeah.
All right, coverage for low-income uninsured.
Yeah, I referenced the Health Partners policy. I showed you all about, at your meeting, Paul, a 5-hour marathon. That, I tested that out. That is published. The sliding scale that we talked about.
Yep.
You know, the 100 to 200% of poverty and all that. So whether it needs to be called out specifically here, I know that was a concern that almost every one of you brought up, was how we're going to cover those low-income or uninsured.
Yeah.
And we certainly would have no problem putting
Some language in here and then putting the policy in the contract. Now, again, no policy is forever. You know, they do evolve and things change in healthcare and that kind of thing. But again, that is our policy, and we honor that policy. But maybe there's some language to say if we were going to change our charity care policy, we would make sure that there was notification and conversation. You know, I think there's a way we can put it in there, because it's really hard to predict 10 years down the road what might change if something changes in healthcare and that kind of thing. So we're just, you know, we're committed to it for sure, but it's hard to predict way down the road as to what might happen there.
From what I could see, your policy was much clearer and better than the one we have, so I thought it was quite acceptable.
Yeah.
So staying, you know, basically, some of these things we're going to have to follow what happens over there.
Yeah, right.
It just,
And I think Carl clarified, though, some of this is publicly
it becomes a
reportable.
discussion point.
So, yeah, so it's out there for people to see.
Yes, it is. I think it's on our website.
Okay.
So the reason I asked I appreciate you guys putting that in there. The reason I asked for it is just that I think it's important, and over the 10 years, I guess what I'm nervous of is, what if it's in there today, and then a year from now it's not in there? That makes a big difference to people. So I would say if there's going to be any change, I honestly think it would be a public Lakeview partnership. I think if there were changes in that specific policy, I would recommend that they would have to be approved by the Common Council if there was some significant change in that policy, just because then there's a little bit of check and balance going on.
I think that's fine. I really do. I think, yeah, but you recognize my concern too,
Yeah,
Paul.
for sure.
You know, is that, geez,
Right.
how can we lock into that's going to be forever?
Well, it's 10,
You know,
it's 10 years essentially,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
And I don't think there's I know there's no discussion about changing anything.
Yeah.
It is for all of our patients.
Yeah.
And so this isn't just for me, this is our policy. And so we don't anticipate it changing. And I think that might be a fair way to say, if we do change it, we're going to have to bring it to you and explain the why and convince you that it's for good reason.
yeah, I think that'd be great.
Okay.
Can I just add to it? I'm Doug Johnson, the Chief Financial Officer for Lakeview Health. The beauty of being a hospital-based service, the EMS, is we do follow we're regulated by the federal government, under charity care, the Schedule H 990 rules. So the beauty is we follow the hospital FAP policy, the 501R regs by the IRS for poverty levels and charity care. So this is all publicly reported. We have rules that we're very regulated as a hospital-based service. So more than likely what changes in the policy is the criteria and what the amount of discount is.
Sure.
That we're regulated by, and we publicly, everything's public. It's on our website, as Carl had issued. We have actually information in our ambulances for family members. We have them posted at the hospital. So when it comes to financial assistance policies, I mean, we're very transparent and very regulated by the state and federal government.
No, and I get that, and I'm not worried about if, the federal poverty level is changes at such and such a level, and things need to be adjusted. I'm not really talking about those types of changes. I'm trying to refer to if there were major things where it was like, okay, instead of a 58% discount for uninsured, it's going to be a 33% discount, or, you know, I'm talking about substantial changes in the policy that would really affect folks. I would like to see at least some kind of public check on that, or input, or approval, or something, so.
Yeah, we change it every year.
Yeah.
Well, also, what I hear from what you just said is that you're not necessarily in control of what the policy is going to be, because it comes under federal regulation.
Well, the
federal
components
regulations
of the
there.
policy, you know, are regulated, are federally defined.
Yeah.
It's the calculation, I think, Paul, as you were alluding to, each year, we're mandated to look in the prior year, look and determine our new discount based on our one-year history, and then we update the policy based on.
Cool.
But it's a government, it's a defined definition from the federal government, and we abide by it. We're standard across health partners.
Okay. We good? Advisory Committee.
Go ahead.
Each partnering municipality.
You know,
I put it in there I put that in there to save us a meeting or two.
So if I'm right, is this the same piece that was in the RFP, basically?
Yes.
That's
Yep.
what I thought.
I did add a few things in there, Paul, just
Okay.
as ideas to get the conversation started about what some of those performance elements may include.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about just our own service at Lakeview Hospital, what John is held accountable to, and Matt and the team, and what they report on weekly, monthly, daily, quarterly, yearly, some of the things that we're held accountable to, and I just line listed those here.
I
So-
also, again, it's for discussion purposes. If there are other people that want an advisory committee, if there's other performance.
You know, this is just to get us started and start the discussion, so.
yeah, I think I think it's, the most important piece here is that there's an agreement that there should be an advisory committee. And what that advisory, the purview of the advisory committee. And I think that the makeup, the structure of that is probably going to be within our domain, and we need to figure that out, because I think we want fire involved, we want first responder group involved.
Right. What I'm trying to wrap my head around is, you know, currently we service, our service as a municipality, as St. Croix EMS, services our neighboring communities, which also have a vested interest in it, right? Financial and safety. So that's why we have that EMS commission. I don't know that in the context of this, that it would be multiple municipalities, because I for sure want to be talking about what does our service look like in the city. I'm not looking to cover somebody else's contract, that, you know what I mean? I really see this as a function, an additional function of our current public safety committee, really, which meets on a monthly basis currently. That includes our fire chief, includes our police chief, includes our EMS.
I think under actually the code, EMS is under, it's a part of public safety.
Correct.
I mean, if you
Under
want to
code, right,
have
right.
a committee like this, I mean, I think it should be just addressing the city, that's more focused on EMS, that's fine too.
I'm just wondering if we need to have more conversation.
About a regional advisory board versus 4 different local advisory boards.
I would agree with that, Ted.
Just,
That's
I mean, we're
what I was-
sharing resources in a regional way, and so it probably makes sense for it to be regional, but then if we're also maybe reporting or partnering or participating in the safety committee, you know, maybe there's a both and.
There's-
something, Bill, that we could figure out?
Probably a couple layers there.
Absolutely. There are 2 components here. Number one, I mean, this is, with the type of oversight that we're looking for right now, especially with performance standards, that we, I think, are probably a little stricter on than our partner, our former partner, in EMS. I think that we do need to have, the city itself needs to have some type of oversight. But I agree, I would say that we need the latitude within the language, the construct of the contract, that we would say that if the other communities are all going to be part of this, that we should sit down with them and try to figure out some type of advisory board where, again, you guys are reporting to, instead of 4 separate entities, or 5, or whatever might happen down the road, 6.
And that wouldn't preclude us from
And that could be-
reporting to each of those town boards
Right.
and reporting to your safety committee. I mean,
Right.
As
that's,
required.
yeah, well, it's a both end.
And I think the idea that we want to support and promote is, we want to be included, and we want to be transparent, we want to put this in front of you, so you're not asking us for anything.
Right.
That we're having the conversations all the time,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so.
So internal and regional.
yeah.
Right? And probably includes the county, right, from a communication standpoint?
I would think so, yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, right.
I don't know if that's a county-led thing, or, I don't know. But
So,
All right.
just for clarification, I'm just going back to the RFP for clarification, so I'm straight in this. So, the RFP says the committee must provide recommendations to Lakeview Hospital regarding the remediation plan to any of those, like, performance issues, I'm guessing here. So Lakeview Hospital will consider any such recommendations in good faith. In developing its remediation plan, however, Lakeview Hospital shall retain final decision-making authority regarding the remediation plan. So I get that. I guess what I'm left with is a question of, and I'm not questioning the good faith, I guess I'm just trying to play this out over a 10-year period. If there was concerns from the city or the regional board or whatnot, in a sense, what remedy do the public boards have if they brought up issues and maybe they weren't addressed? I'm just trying to figure out, like, what kind of, in a sense, is there any kind of check there? Is it just, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that's what the intention is. I'm just trying to say, how does that play out practically?
They have their own contract.
What's that?
They have their own contract. And that ability to address those issues should be in there as well.
But I'm curious from you guys, like, how do you see that?
So I see the advisory board as holding us to the expectations of the contract. To your point, Jim, I think you're talking, we're going to have, let's just say conceivably 3 to 4 contracts. Those will all have to be looked at separately from that perspective. But I think from an advisory board, how are we doing, what's coming up, how are we meeting the needs of the community? That may be a different feel versus, are you meeting the contractual elements? As an example, if we pulled an ambulance out, now we think 1's enough, obviously not meeting the contract.
Okay.
So that's going to be a different approach than, we got the hot airfare coming up, let's talk through how we're going to manage that. I see those as separate things. Contractual compliance versus how are we meeting the needs of the community and what are we doing to improve.
What I heard you say, Paul, was more, what recourse do we have?
In a sense, if you're saying, gosh, we didn't like the way you covered this, or we didn't, and we're saying, well, we do. We do like the way, and so tough bounce, kind of a thing. But I wonder, and maybe this is where Carl and Kathy can help us, is what would an escalation type process look like to bring it to, in a certain way, so we arbitrate it and come to some common ground? Or I think there might be a way to handle, almost like a grievance, so to speak.
Corrective action
I
that
think
wasn't
that
taken.
would be fair for us to figure out a way to, and Kathy, that's not unheard of.
We had, well, I was just, in one of the contracts, we had, if we can't come to an agreement on a remediation plan, then, we had it in the termination portion, Lakeview continues to provide services for 2 years. I mean, if it gets to a point where it's just not working, I just noticed that, it's 2 years, but I don't know if there
and
would be some, you're not talking about
I
that.
don't think Paul's
You're
talking about
some
that level
other
of stuff. It's just a,
body.
how do we
I'm just
escalate? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just, and maybe I'm saying this word too much, just the checks and balances, that there has to be something that the sides or the other communities can do. In a sense, what the RFP says is that, and no offense, I'm not trying to be offensive, but Lakeview would hold all the cards in terms of the authority of that body. And I understand that because you're running the service, so I understand that you have the rights, you have the responsibility. So I get that. But I'm just trying to say, how do you, if stuff comes up, like what's the process? So I would love to see language that could be developed over some sort of process.
This is the process we're going to use.
Yeah.
If this, I know that we have that in some of our physician contracts.
Okay.
That this is how it works if we're not happy with it, the way things are going. The first thing is going to be this.
Right.
Second thing is something like that.
Exactly.
That would give you some assurance that we're going to have an escalation process to further the conversation.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
Well, typically, there are escalation provisions in a number of different types of contracts where there's some disagreement on a significant aspect of the performance of the contract by one party or the other. And generally, their processes start with good faith discussions with key decision makers from both parties who have the ability to and the authority to say, okay, we're going to do it this way, we agree. And if those more informal conversations don't result in a resolution that's satisfactory to both parties, it can be escalated to include a process that involves a disinterested third party who can kind of break the tie for you. Now that gets you into more of a litigious type of process, but it doesn't get you into the courts. It falls short of going to the courts. So you could get a third-party mediator to help resolve the differences, and you can bump it up from there to something even more closely aligned to litigation. That would be an arbitration process.
I also think that was, Carl, I think you were speaking to contractual obligations, but I think there's other things that the advisory board would weigh in on, let's say like patient experience scores. That's not necessarily going to be in the contract that we have to maintain a 90%, scored 9 or 10 on the patient experience report, but that would be something that the advisory board might have an interest in and want to hold Lakeview accountable or in some way influence some decisions made towards that. Yeah, for me, it's a medical thing. So are we giving aspirin to people with chest pain? Are we defibrillating cardiac arrest, that kind of thing? Those are the clinical performance measures that I think that board should be reported to on. That's not necessarily going to be in the contract language, but that's where and I'm completely with you too. I'd like to see that board have some authority or some influence so that there is a check and balance in place from the public.
Yes, I agree with you, Bjorn. Absolutely, and the type of issues that the committee is going to address, I think, are really focused on, how are we performing for the residents of the city, and where there are some gaps and differences in terms of views of how those gaps exist between the parties. I would advocate for not having the remedy be termination of the entire contract, because in one case there may be some disagreement, where in all other cases things are just going just perfectly fine. So I think we could try to come up with some way to resolve it short of terminating the contract. Of course, if it's absolutely horrible, we will have termination rights for cause termination rights built into the contract, so that remedy will be available. But I think these types of issues that the committee is going to be concerned with, we could find some other way, more collaborative way to try to resolve those differences.
Independent, qualified mediator could bring expertise to bear.
I think that could be helpful. Yeah.
Anything else on that? Capital assets.
So is this the part of if the contract doesn't work, or is this the part of like acquiring assets, or how does it?
So I brought it up, Paul, because you brought it up. No, but a lot of people had brought this up in sentences along the way. So I captured it here as just a discussion. It wasn't included in the RFP, but I just want to make sure that it's, front of mind for us. And what type of discussion needs to occur? Is there an expectation?
Can you walk me through it in terms of other contracts you've done in terms of, okay, does Lakeview essentially buy the ambulances? Is it a rental thing? Is it a thing where you have, like, how does this work from the front side, I guess?
Yeah, so, I know in the town of Hudson, we just we bought our own assets. So the hospital owns the assets.
Okay.
As a nonprofit, and it's for pretty much all of our service areas. I know at the last go-round, we looked at a possible asset acquisition for some of the resources that I think we'd entertain. What we do is the last go-round, we got an independent consultant that did a fair market value assessment on all the assets that wanted to be sold. And price them out, and then we never got to a negotiation. We got a report, but we'd have to refresh that. We definitely want an independent reviewer, and just to look at who's an expert on the age of the ambulances and the equipment that you potentially want to sell. I know we don't have them in our inventory. However, we're planning in the future for newer. We do keep our inventory relatively new with an ambulance. A new ambulance every year, since we're up to 7, 8, 9 of them now. And we would continue that practice, but as far as the normal assets, I'm open for, looking at values and useful life and remaining useful life, et cetera, and as part of a negotiation.
You did get an actual report, right, the last time around with all the assets, values. And I would imagine you would update that.
Yeah, it's 2 or 3 years old, or 2 years old now, and it included the
was
dive,
2017.
a lot of the dive equipment and a few other assets.
And again,
It's appreciated significantly since.
I think we have to.
Pull that out.
Have a conversation to say, what is it that we would need?
Yeah.
That could help, take some of these off your hands. But again, it was a different scenario when we talked about it last time. So whether we'd need office equipment, all of that kind of a thing, I think.
Yeah, you
those
just have to talk
just
about it.
wouldn't. So we could go through that list at least and think about the things that would be obviously things that we could use. The one thing that we do need to talk about, Nate, and I don't know if it falls into this category, but the transition time for basing our people until the hospital ambulance garage is ready. We need to talk a little bit about that, and I think that falls kind of into that category
That may
loosely.
be a meeting away. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but really, back to the capital, I just want to emphasize one thing. We're coming into this intending on no needs, right? So
That you don't need.
right, our commitment to the community is if this goes as planned, we have no capital needs. John's probably, you coming? No capital needs. We will have staffing needs, just like any service expanding would, but we're coming in with no intended capital needs. So we could look at that. What would that look like? What do you have available, and what's the value of that?
So you would be are you saying you don't have the need, or you would be interested in buying?
We don't have a need, and in fact, I should know this, but John, when's the next ambulance?
it's here somewhere, and I don't know where
Okay,
it
it's in the state of Minnesota? Okay. The next new ambulance is here, and like Doug mentioned, we continually replace our ambulances, and we're in a good spot now.
But we haven't now for a couple of years evaluated your ambulances and how they compare to our older ambulances, and might there be an advantage to, so I think that's why Nate put it on here, is to say we probably need some more conversation and evaluation of what the needs are in that way. So a little more work to do there.
And John did just mention, if there are some, if you have assets that are newer than ours that could replace or leapfrog some of the, or some of what we have, certainly, I think it deserves a look.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I put it on here. I want to make sure that that wasn't left untouched. So,
All right,
I mean, following on that, if you looked at it and said, no, we don't, there's no place for that rig in our business, perhaps our third ambulance, it just has no value to us, then what do we do? How do we?
well, I'm not sure I can advise you on what.
Craigslist or?
Or keep
Well, I
it
don't know
for
if
possible
there's-
future use, if you need it.
Could,
mothball it.
Yeah.
or sell it.
There
and,
is a market. I mean,
They must have sold ambulances
Okay,
before.
so we just
I
move
would
into
think.
different.
Yeah, move in a different direction. Then you can
I know-
pocket the money on that,
Yeah, good.
I know
or escrow the money.
our older ambulances, John can, they get reused in other places, right? They get refurbished and,
Yeah, typically, we run our trucks till you can't really run them anymore in EMS. And then we've donated every truck that we've ever had until the last truck we bought. We actually traded in the ambulance, and it was only worth $6,000. They lose their market value so quickly after they're a couple years old that the only thing that becomes value of it is the actual box itself. And they run between $4,000 and $6,000. So we end up just giving it back to our broker and just take it off of our bill on the next truck or on that truck. So that's what we do. But we've donated to the sheriff's department, to the fire department, multiple fire departments. Hurricane Rita, Matt was in Texas and he came home on an airplane and left our whole ambulance there. We donated it to a service that lost everything in the hurricane. That's what we've done with most of our assets.
So I appreciate you bringing it up. I don't know if this is the time to talk about it, because you're talking about starting out, getting capital assets. But I think at the last meeting, I was talking about if the contract was to not work out. Do you know what I'm talking about? So,
I remember that. Yeah.
so just the thought I had, and I'd love to see this somehow put in contractual language. But it's a little different now, because if you're saying these are not necessarily ambulances that would have been acquired from the city of Hudson. What I was asking for previously was if there were ambulances that you had acquired from the city of Hudson, that we would get those back at no cost, feeling like we have to up and start a service at some point. I'm not predicting that would be the case, or saying that would be the case in terms of not fulfilling the contract.
Right.
But what I'm hearing is if there's no capital need for an ambulance, so you would essentially be coming with your own ambulance to start, is that correct?
Yeah, well, and evaluating whether
Yeah.
there's some ambulance here that we could take off your hands that's newer than ours. That's what John was referring to. I think, too, I mean, again, if we're going to buy those assets from you, and then, we're no longer going to need them for this footprint, you'd buy them back from us. I mean, it would seem to me that was how we would do it.
Yeah, I don't want to buy
Or
them.
whatever market value they're.
Yeah, I don't want to buy them back. I want to get them back and for free. And the reason is, the reason is that we're taking a risk. And I understand both sides are, but ultimately we're responsible for the safety of our people. We would not have in our budget, we do this annual budget, we wouldn't be budgeting for, we're going to buy our ambulances back someday, thinking that. And also we would need startup money of some type, because right now we pay a $230,000 subsidy to keep our current EMS afloat. What I'm saying is if I want something that's in the contract that's strong, and that would be sort of a penalty for Lakeview if, for whatever reason, you couldn't serve out the 10 years of the contract. And as I see it, that would be either the ambulances coming back for free or some kind of a financial penalty that would be given to the city of Hudson so that the city of Hudson could restart a service. So I think we do need that in the contract. I don't know what that amounts to, and that's where we would negotiate. But I think that's very reasonable to ask for, and I think we're in a position where we have to ask for that because we haven't done a contract before for 10 years like this. So we're risking
I
it.
would just, I think we could have a conversation about
That, I would just challenge a little bit on the risk that you're taking. We're an ambulance service that's been around a long time and has provided service to numerous communities on both sides of the river for a long time at a very high level. So I think we need to talk more about that, Paul, that's all, as to how would that work and how does it typically work in this kind of circumstance? Because this isn't the first time these kinds of arrangements were made. So I'm just saying let's keep the conversation going on this.
Yeah, and I'm not doubting anything of what you're saying in that statement. And if I think I was in your shoes and I felt that strongly about my ambulance service being able to successfully do the 10 years, then I would take kind of this potential penalty or giving the ambulances back free, thinking it's not going to happen. So it's it also says to me it's a measure of the degree of confidence that you guys have in being able to fulfill the 10 years.
If I may, I know what you're saying, Paul. I just wonder if we want to go down the path of doing a sort of with cause termination and without cause termination. And the with cause termination has to do with the measures. If you're not hitting those measures, then we can say, you know, we can terminate within a year. But also there's a penalty to equipment, supplying equipment. You know, that type of, would you be open to that type of clause? That's the with cause.
Yeah, I don't know if Carl has anything to add. Carl, any thoughts about this from your standpoint, or Doug?
Well, you know, I think it comes down to what the parties can reach a meeting of the minds on. I would say, you know, if we get into 7 to 8 years of the contract before the unlikely event occurs that it ends at that point, then we're talking about very depreciated assets that we will have. So that's one thing to keep in mind if the direction is to assign back title to any equipment that we purchase from the city. As a nonprofit entity, we have to be cautious about giving away a nonprofit tax-exempt entity, we have to be careful about giving away tax-exempt assets because we have an obligation to the city and the state as a nonprofit and as a tax-exempt entity to protect our tax-exempt status. We have to be cautious about giving away tax-exempt assets. So that might be one of the issues we'd have to wrestle to the ground if we were going to consider something, something having to do with providing dollars back to the city in the event of a termination.
You know, up to, I guess I've agreed with pretty much everything you've said up to this point. This one I don't, first of all, we don't know that they're going to buy our assets. Sounds like they don't need them. You know, we'll end up selling them to New Richmond or Baldwin or River Falls maybe. Second, I mean, I think you make a really good point about cause versus without cause, for cause, without cause. Things change. I mean, we hear that all the time. The city council may not look anywhere near what it looks like right now, 2 years from now, 4 years from now. And it could be a whole different situation with respect to what that council may want. Not to mention the fact that 4 or 5 years from now, the depreciation value of any equipment we give them, you'd probably say, take it, it's all yours. But I get back to that I think maybe that's something more internal for us to look at. I had suggested before that the council could take a look at perhaps escrowing a portion of what we are spending on EMS right now on an annual basis and preparing for an event, that we might have to take this over again and do that for however long a council may feel it necessary to do that. So that would give us an opportunity then to save up some money in an emergency to be able to take the service over again. I get it, I just don't think that we should have this in the contract for a variety of reasons, especially if we don't sell them the equipment. But I know that, we hear about the depreciated value of these things after just a couple of years, we know that. So I don't know that it would even be worth it trying to recapture all that equipment, if we even give it to them or sell it to them.
And I guess when I was talking about the value of the assets that we have at current level, at current state,
Okay.
you know.
Even if we had already gotten money for them, if we sold them to somebody else?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Getting back into it's going to cost us a lot more than getting out of it.
Yeah.
In terms of what we're going to get out of it, based on the depreciation. We would never be able to get the equipment that's at even that level for that price.
Yeah.
We're going to buy a lot better, a lot newer stuff than that. So it's going to cost, it costs $1 million to get back into the business.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that can be done, like I said before, we could take a third of what we're spending on it right now, escrow that over a period of, I don't think that we would foresee getting out of this, within the next 3, 4, 5 years, but it could be 5 years down the road. That'd give us, over $500,000. And we certainly have enough money in an emergency fund that we could fund the rest of it and get it up and
Right,
running.
yeah.
So.
And at that point, we just said, hey, we're confident in our relationship here.
Yeah.
Then I'm sure there's other things we can find to do with that money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I still would like to see some kind of a financial penalty, and I don't have a number on that, but I'd like to negotiate that as protection for the city. And Bill, maybe your point's good. We have to establish cause and without cause or something like that. I just think we owe it to our people to have a backup plan. I think we can escrow for part of it, but if it's in 2 years, we're in a boatload of trouble because we can't put away that much money in a couple of years. So I think it can come from both places, but I also do think it reflects the level of confidence that Lakeview has in their service. If you have the level of confidence, I think you'll never see this penalty. So,
again though, Paul, I would think that they have all the confidence in the world. I've got confidence in them. I don't have confidence in what the makeup of this council is going to be in 2 years and what the will of this council may be in 2 years. And then we'd be punishing Lakeview for something that's completely out of their control.
I don't think it's out of their control. I think there's
If our council were to
metrics.
say, we're going to terminate the contract right now without cause.
Oh, I'm sorry. To be clear, I'm
can't
sorry. That's a
apply to that.
miscommunication. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about us from our end necessarily without the cause piece that Bill's talking about. I'm not talking about canceling it in some kind of bad faith from a vote on the council. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more of an extreme case where for whatever reason, I think the words you use are with cause.
With cause, yeah.
Yeah. So,
That we terminate or Lakeview terminates or either one?
well, originally I was
We
thinking.
do for cause.
But originally I was actually thinking Lakeview.
Yeah.
Because,
really?
well, do you remember, I don't want to bring this up too much, but the Marine on the St. Croix piece we talked about previously a little bit with, in the north, that's the kind of situation where we would be in a tough position if you guys canceled. So maybe it's not canceling on our end at all. Maybe it's canceling, maybe that's the
Yeah, okay.
clarification.
Never even gave it that consideration.
That's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
So more with respect to Lakeview?
Yes, if you guys, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we maybe need more discussion around this. We are building a $1 million ambulance garage, a little risk for us taking on that. We are, over time, going to have to add ambulances. We're taking on risk there, and really there's not any cost to the city at all for our ambulance service, so there's no financial risk to the city as it relates to that. So it feels like we're taking on our share of the risk here, and it just, I don't know. So let's talk more, Paul. I'm not averse to it, and we're really confident that you're going to be happy, and so I get that part.
Yep.
And I don't want my concern about it to reflect lack of confidence, because we're investing a lot in this partnership, and I think that should be acknowledged also.
Yep, I think that's true.
Can I ask one question back to the assets? You said you don't need assets, so you currently have the asset of the ambulance that's covering Town of Hudson, and the one that's coming on board this month would be that second coverage for the area? Is that?
No, so it's just our normal attrition of vehicles.
Yep.
So the truck that's coming now that was planned 2 years ago, actually 5 years ago, because we build out 5 years in our capital. But the truck that's here or going to be here in a week or so, that was planned to be here. It had nothing to. We didn't know this a year ago up here, so that will bring our fleet to 8 vehicles. I don't need 8 vehicles, so we have two that are backups to those vehicles, because we're constantly doing vehicle maintenance. So we're pulling them backup trucks into primary as maintenance goes on, and then we move them back to the backup. So what I was saying is, if your assets are newer, less mileage than my backup ones, maybe that's something we want to entertain. I'll say to Nate, I think we could benefit from those trucks. Let's sell our old ones. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
I guess the way I was looking at that same question, Bill, was, are you adding to your fleet, total fleet size in order to do this, or are you reducing them now, going to have only one backup truck?
Yeah, no, well, we need a minimum of 2 backup trucks. Right now, if this contract doesn't go through, I don't need to have 8 trucks sitting there. I need to have 7. Because I talked about the events. There's some events where we bring on 2 events or 2 extra trucks in a day to cover events. If we're going to add this resource, I'm going to need to augment that, so I'll end up keeping it. So we would go with, my recommendation would be 8. Would you agree with that, Matt, I think? So we'd have 8 total licensed ambulances, equipped and ready to go as needed. Today we have 7.
Perfect.
Anything else? Assets? All right, we got Kathy and Carl with the miscellaneous general and back, okay. Any other issues that we need to discuss?
Yeah, could we circle back with some of the performance elements? I assume that part of the performance elements would be taking a look at the number of times mutual aid calls happen, and how does that affect staffing?
Right.
And then another measure being how many, I think it was definitely not the 5-hour marathon Paul's meeting, I guess. But it was in a previous meeting where I was asking, at what point are you moving your ambulance assets to where you're covering from Bayport? How many times does that incident happen before you say, you know what, we need to add an ambulance? Could that be a measurement? And could mutual aid calls be a measurement?
Yeah, it can be, but again, I don't know the number, Bill. I don't
Right.
know that number. I don't. Bjorn, do you have any sense on how we look at the mutual aid? We've never had an issue with it, and when I compare our mutual aid usage to other providers in our neighborhood on that side of the river, we don't even compare in the percentage. I'm not saying that's right, and that's the right way to do it. I think we hold ourselves to a higher standard than maybe other providers can, because they don't have the assets to do it, but.
Yeah.
Could you just give an example? Could you give an example of that, what we mean by that high standard as it relates to mutual aid and other things?
Yeah, so our mutual aid right now, I think Well, we actually went down last year because with the anticipation of the town of Hudson, once we knew the contract was going to move forward, we started our hiring process. We had the people hired and in place before January 1st. We had to pay them, so we put that truck in service. And that truck was in service 24/7 before January 1st. That really reduced our mutual aid request or need. And so we've always been right around 2% of our total annual volume in mutual aid. And again, there is nowhere out there nationally can I find anywhere that says what the standard is, unless you know something different than I do. But and I anticipated if we added a fifth ambulance into our operation, meaning here in Hudson, so we'll have 2 here, or 2 in Stillwater and 1 in North St. Paul, we could probably reduce that down to 1% or even less. If we start creeping up to that 2% again, it may or may not mean that we need to add a resource. But when I look at I look at all of our volumes based on time of the day. So I can tell you right now that our peak time is from 10 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. We spike. And we've been spiking like that for 5 or 6 years, and it doesn't vary. It stays consistent. So if I had to add a resource, it might be 8 hours of the day. Doesn't mean I'd add a 24-hour truck, but you know what? For this amount of time, we've given away X number of mutual aid calls. I'm going to Nate going, you know what? I think there's a pattern here. I think we need to react to it. That's how
It's what's in the contract, what is delegated to the oversight committee to help determine and enforce. I think that's just a philosophical question.
Right.
And I think that's where you look at that historical data. Again, I can pull you every single call on Mondays and show you what we've done on Mondays through each hour of the day. And that's where you would bring that back to an advisory committee and go, you know, here's 5 years of data. And if we all of a sudden in a 3-month period, we see this big spike, if we can't explain it or it continues, then we need to make a decision on increasing that. So because our business is so unpredictable, you know, we could have 3 months of just nonstop running, and then boom, everything drops off. And then we end up having an average year. So I don't know, Bill, if that really answers your question, but
Sure,
I probably wouldn't be in this position if I knew that.
No,
the true
right.
formula
What you're
to that.
asking originally was, could that be one of the metrics
Right.
looked at? Yes,
Yes.
that's a short answer.
For sure.
Right, right on. And then is there any, if your service area was to grow beyond this, right? And I'm talking about future growth. Is there a contract stipulation that we can put in there that the coverage remains the same for the city of Hudson despite that growth?
I guess.
Does that make sense?
You mean the performance
Performance.
requirements? Yeah, I mean,
This contract is
They are
for the city of Hudson.
right.
Yeah, okay. That's a fair point.
Yep. So I think what you're asking is, are we going to now all of a sudden divide our resources up?
Correct.
And move them out? I think the way John describes how we use our resources should provide a little comfort in that too. We don't actually see this as just a 2-ambulance model. We want to put all our resources to where the need is. So there might be days where there's 3 or 4 ambulances sitting in Hudson for whatever reason. So if we grow, we have to respond to that need as it presents.
And realistically, if you look at the boundaries of the service area beyond Hudson where there might be growth beyond the city, we couldn't service that area based out of this base right now.
Facility.
So there would have to be additional resources placed outside of the current service area to do that. So
Got it.
I think that would, as much as, you know, it would work itself out, because I don't think it would be possible to cover growth from Hudson. That makes sense.
That makes sense.
A long ways between comments.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Anybody else?
I have a few questions that may not be germane to the actual contract at this point, but when do you expect the new building to be ready?
Doug?
So we're currently in design stage. We have architect has a preliminary drawing for the building and placement on the property at Hudson Hospital. We're currently rescaling the building or just kind of fine tuning it based on our need and size. And we'll be ready to come to the city, I would guess, in the next 60 days with a permit and zoning and, okay, 90 maybe in reality, I'm not sure. And then we want to get in the ground, preferably, definitely, we want it shelled in and ready up before snow flies for winter conditions. But we don't have a timeline yet for a completion time of the building, but we're ready to roll. You know, we're ready to do soil borings, we're ready to do surveys, we're ready to do work around that building. So.
And it is a fairly significant expansion, as you know. It's expanding our emergency department at the hospital and then building this right into that, that project.
Yeah, one more parking lot gone.
Well, I mean, ideally, it'd be great by the end of the year if we'd had it closed and up and running.
Awesome.
Not 100% sure. The ER is going to take a little bit longer. It's a little bit more deeper scope. But we want to do them joining, so we will want to talk about possibly a lease space, or if we can lease quarters or something. I think as part of this in the short term. We don't have the room at the hospital. We don't have the ideal space at the hospital to run 2 trucks out of. We don't have the quarters, the sleeping quarters at this point, so if the city would entertain a possible short-term lease to transition us till we get a building really fully completed, would be ideal. But
Do you think you'd leave one truck up there and then one somewhere, in one of our facilities? Is that where you have thought that far?
That's what we're thinking now.
Yeah, because we need the sleeping quarters and the ambulance, and we've taken that out of existing space in the hospital, but to take more for another ambulance and 2 more, I mean, there is an existing space for the second one. We really, Tom Borowski, the president, did a great job to create some space for us, but very tough to find a couple more spaces.
We have talked about other options.
yeah, would be great.
Through the warm months, we can pull in a camper or do something like that too. But we're just thinking through our options through this transition period.
Yeah. Yeah. And, okay, another, and this may need to be contractual or not, but that the charges, base charges, would be the same. We would be following the same scale, the same list as Lakeview.
Yep.
It's a regional, the entire area.
Yep. Yep. And Doug, is there any clarification on that?
Then we charge you, hospital-based service, we charge one fee, usual and customary to all patients, no matter what our service area is, what state. All patients are billed identical under the same fee structure.
Okay. And then the last one, which, I don't know, maybe, are we supposed to take this up? It's what we've had conversations in the past contract about the resources, human resources, the staff that we have, and who might be viable to become part of Lakeview.
I would refer back to a document, I think a couple meetings ago, I shared what our base expectations are for hiring paramedics. And we would entertain all interested and qualified applicants. And that still stands. We're going to have staffing needs, and if they're interested and qualified, we would hope to see an application.
Okay. And I guess I'll ask John do you consider, you consider our people are technically qualified, they're capable?
So one of the maybe ironies of this whole process is that I share an office with Dr. Burnett, who's the medical director for St. Croix EMS. So we have the same guidelines, the same procedures for credentialing paramedics. We run them through the same evaluation criteria. That doesn't mean that the city of Hudson had the same standards as Lakeview Hospital did, not that one's better or worse, but from a medical standpoint, they have passed the credentialing as it is laid out for them currently. So I would hope that they would all be qualified, to meet the qualifications for Lakeview too. Just be a matter of going through the right process.
And as in any new employee would be going, we go through an evaluation period, so.
Exactly, yeah.
Now that's, I know with the discussions, that was an easy transition for, a possibility for paramedics. You don't have EMTs in your operation.
No.
So is there any, is there any route for them?
Cart, any needs that we know of for EMTs?
Well, let me be more direct about that. 2 years ago, you had a program, said, okay, you would hire, there were so many EMTs that you would help put through training to become a paramedic, if that's what they were committed to.
Can I address that, at least to begin the conversation? That was something that we had insisted on. Maybe that's a hard word, but Tom and I wanted to take care of at least the top 4 workers in the EMT ranks, and at the time the EMTs represented, I believe it was 9.2 FTEs, and we had 4 EMTs that represented 5.5 FTEs. And so we were under the presumption that that was their livelihood, that was what they did, and so we wanted to take care of those 4 primarily. And if one of those 4 did not want to take advantage of an opportunity that was being offered then by Lakeview, the next one in line would then also be offered a similar situation. So it was the top 4, our consumers, I guess. And then we find out none of them wanted to do it. None of them wanted to take up the offer. And it wasn't until, frankly, your ad hoc committee meetings that we found out why, and it was because they all had other jobs, full-time jobs, and they were, even though they were putting in a lot of hours, it wasn't their primary job, and that's why they didn't want to do the additional schooling and become a paramedic and make it a career. So that's kind of where we were at, and that's how we ended up with that provision in the contract. But at that point in time, there was very little interest. Brandon had talked with his EMTs, and he had at least talked to 3 of the 4 and said, at least 3 of them had said absolutely not. That's not the career path they wanted to take. So anyway, that's where we got to where we were at with the contract. And then I guess you could weigh in on that, Nate, on whether you'd be offering a similar thing to the EMTs. It was education. I think that you would pay them back upon completion.
At the time, yeah, that was the offer.
Yeah. So, does that answer your question?
No, it just as,
I
yeah,
think it's a
sort of.
different situation. I think it's a different situation now, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in an entirely
Yeah.
different ballpark.
And it isn't something that we considered in the RFP, obviously.
Right.
It wasn't in that language,
Right.
so.
And now we're not talking about the RFP anymore. That was,
Right.
that was the opening. So what are we really going to do here?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
For my part, I would, I'd love to be able to say we have some opportunity for those people. I don't know how many, whether we have different people, and we've gone through the .6 FTEs where we took away, basically made it a part-time job for them, and now we've gone back the other direction. What do we have? I don't have.
I don't even know where we're at with FTEs at this point. I don't think it's as many, frankly. It's hard to say because with the hours that Brandon was putting in, he was taking hours away from what others may have been able to work, and I don't think that what he was putting in was being counted as part of the FTEs that were involved.
Now, is that something we need to look at then perhaps? and
Yeah, I
come
think
back
we
and
need
say,
to
hey,
come
you
back
know,
and find out what, yeah.
Get it, or,
Yeah, yeah. I think that'd be a good idea for us to do. Anybody else? Anything? So here's what I would like to see happen. I'd like Carl and Kathy to get together, kind of go through everything that we've talked about, and I would like to try to, rather than wait until we're all done with our discussions, I'd like to see that working contemporaneously with what we're doing at the meetings and coming back with language to us and making sure that's all what we wanted, what we heard, and we're going to be making some edits to it, I would imagine, as it comes to us. Next week, I'd like to meet twice. We can do that in the evenings,
Depending on the evening.
okay? All right, so the first one,
Wednesday I have work stuff, so I
how
can't.
about Tuesday?
I'm just trying to think, is there public, no, we don't meet till May.
Tuesday
Does
we
Park
ha-
Board meet on?
No, Tuesday is
Plan Commission.
Plan Commission, but that starts at 6, so I'd like to do this at 7 o'clock.
Okay.
Does that work?
works for me.
And I'd like to do Thursday, and Thursday we could do any time. I'm going right now, I got the schedule when this room is available, so. So next Thursday, we can go anytime. Do it in the evening again?
I'm free whenever on the Thursday.
Paul, when can,
I think that's good for me. I'd rather go, if we can go a little earlier, that would be better, I think.
well, yeah, and that's fine. Tuesday is just because of the Plan Commission.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So,
we could do
what are you
like
thinking,
could you-
5, 6,
Yeah, like six-ish.
6 o'clock?
If that works for you.
That work for you guys?
That's Thursday you're talking?
Yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call over to the county and see if they could come in here, and I'll let you know what day they can come in. I guess I'd try to, I think we've done a lot here. We'll kind of sum up here in a moment, but I think I'd like to try to get them in Tuesday if possible, but I definitely would like them in here next week, if that works for them.
Yeah, I could.
I had a couple of thoughts. You know, as we're looking at this contract, 10 years is a long time, right? Is there a reason to, and I guess I'm looking to the phone, Carl and Kathy. You know, is there something that we want to write in there that there's sort of a review process of, if it's taking a look at response times, that it could be renegotiated like in 3-5 years, something like that? Is that type of flexibility within the contract a good thing, not good thing?
Well, you have the oversight committee that's going to be reviewing that kind of thing, but, pardon me?
I was agreeing with you. I thought that might be something that could be addressed by the oversight committee,
Okay.
advisory committee.
And there's always, at least I put this in my contracts, the contract can be amended by written agreement of both parties, so that if the oversight committee comes up with, hey, you know, whatever it is that would work better, and it's agreeable, and it's something that would need to be contractual.
So it doesn't
then
need to
you
be
would-
written that way in the contract?
Well, we would have an amendment clause that would allow that.
Got it.
I mean, the idea, I think, of the oversight committee is to be reviewing things on an ongoing basis.
Okay.
And that process, I mean, that we need to figure out will be important to that.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody know where we're at for the next conversation? Do we need to recap any of this?
There's a couple things I want to recap, just so we're clear. I think, Paul, we had quite a discussion on response times. I think we'll clarify that a little bit more, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I want to make sure we're clear with that. I think we're good on first responders. Term and termination, I'm going to leave that.
Yeah, Carl and I.
Carl and Kathy, you can do that. I think the advisory committee, I'm actually seeing that as a great opportunity to have a good discussion about how that looks and how that works for you. So I don't see that as a hurdle, but maybe put some structure, some thoughts together from your perspective. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And we can add a little bit more structure to it in the contract. So any other thoughts from the galley here and stuff that I might have missed?
I was just wondering if there is other reporting do you want to capture? It's one thing to have advisory committees, but does the council want an annual report presented or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Those kind of expectations we could put in along some sort of reporting type, you know.
We kind of expect that from our department heads anyway, to come in at least on an annual basis with some type of report, and I would view this as a similar situation, at least on an annual basis. And maybe, I think it was mentioned quarterly, at least, you know, if this is, presuming this is passed, that first year, just to make sure, you know, everybody's confidence level is up, everybody's anxiety level is down, and that would be a good thing to do, I think.
I make a final comment. Jim had a great idea when he talked about the circumference of the service area, you know, different rings of the service area. And, you know, it's pretty typical. You see that in the helicopter services. They have rings to show their response time out. It's a great idea. As I was thinking through it on the meeting here, it would be really difficult to try and show response times in a ring like that, because you know, how do you narrow down the addresses within? It would be to report on that quarterly, even annually. To do that would be very difficult to do. But I think I just want to clarify the response times. Again, we want to be very careful. We didn't again throw response times as high as we did in there, thinking, you know, we're going to cut back on what we do. We're just trying to be very realistic on the geographic of the area. But there may be opportunities for us to look at maybe different parts of the city on response times. But again, then you're trying to narrow down the calls you do in that area versus globally, the whole area. So if there's maybe, I don't know if you can research and come up with some other thoughts on response times, and I've looked everywhere, and it's across the board on what, you know, nationally what people are looking for, and we went with the lower average on that.
I think, you know, in thinking about that maybe some of these things should be in there as goals, or you know, for one, some we're going to just have to gather some more data.
Yeah.
But perhaps there are some goals in here based on what we know that said, okay, here's the goal for the first year, and that's something you're going to be measuring and working with the advisory council.
Yeah.
On how realistic is this?
Yeah.
And
the other thing.
John, just one thing. I think we should look back and see what the current performance has been in the city, just so we're grounded in what the base is.
And then we use that as kind of current performance. We look at the national standards as another one, and then we figure out between fractile and average what we can both live with. I think that's probably the best way to surround it.
Yeah, and again, the other thing I want to clarify, Nate and I, he's been in meetings all week, I've been in meetings all week. We never really connected to make that plan that, you know, he was writing it off the city of Hudson, I was going globally. And so when he called me and said, hey, what are we doing on response times? He had 8. I said, no, I think if we're going to look at the whole thing, we got to look at the 10-minute. So I want to clarify that. It was not, we're trying to get as much time as we can buffer in there. But again,
you had both numbers in there.
This was really about having a conversation, really loud and clear.
Yeah.
And so we'll adjust and we'll connect. That's hopefully the way the process should work.
what we can do, what I can do very easily is separate out response times for the city. So we can very easily, instead of doing rings in certain parts of the city, which again, I don't think that would be not possible. It's possible, but it would take someone's full time to do that. But in a city, we do that all the time. We individually select the city. So we can select Hudson as a standalone. We can select the village in North Hudson as a standalone, Troy, whatever.
Well, for our purposes, we're just really interested in Hudson.
Yep,
Because that's
got it.
the service area, and that's who we represent.
Yep.
And I'm glad you're hearing me. I think what in my mind, what I'm going off is North St. Paul and Stillwater.
Yeah.
And those average run times, I think, are excellent. And those 90% frac tile times are right around 8 minutes to 7.5 minutes. So what I'm hoping for is that you guys can bring that down to that level.
Yeah.
Because I just think it's too high in this first pass, is all I'm saying.
I said this earlier, that was 2018 performance.
Yep.
And that isn't, what we would probably put in the contract.
Right.
You'd probably, and I think, that's what I mean, I think we can find something, Paul, that you can live with.
I think, Jim, you bring up a great point. There's a difference between a contractual element and goals. Because we have goals all over the hospital, 500 and some goals that we look at all the time. And those keep getting lower and lower and better and tighter, and so I think you bring up a good point. But where does it all fit? So.
All right, everybody good? So I will let you know if the county's going to be here. I'll call them right away and try to get them in. I'd prefer to try to get them here Tuesday, but that'll be up to them to see. Hopefully they'll be able to be here next week, period, sometime. And we'll get back to everybody, and we'll get notice out.
Mr. Mayor, sorry.
Yeah.
Is Tuesday the 23rd?
Yes.
I can't do the 7 PM, sorry. I don't have
Okay.
my calendar written down. I could probably do earlier, though,
Like what time?
like, well, let me think. Or I could do later, I could probably do an 8.
Is 8 too late for people? What's that?
Sorry about that, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, you gave me, you said Tuesday's good from 10:30 to 4.
Do we have anything Monday? We have to-
Okay, so something's going on in here at 4:30,
Monday's
okay,
council.
right, so,
But they could go across the hall, Rich. Cable could be across the hall.
oh, sure, yep.
Oh, yeah.
So what, if we were to do it earlier, what time?
I didn't know that.
Well,
I'm kicking them out.
this is Tuesday. The earliest I could do would be, I could be here about 3.
That works.
Yeah.
That work for people?
Yep.
Let me check my
On
calendar,
Tuesday.
Tuesday, the 23rd,
Sorry about that.
not a
3
problem.
PM.
Glad you realized it now.
Probably make the,
But I have to take off by like 5:30, so.
that would probably make the county a little happier too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay.
All right, 3 o'clock?
Tuesday, the 23rd.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Carl.
You were on TV, by the way.
The phone was.
Yeah, I've got a voice for TV.
Do we have to move to adjourn?
What's
Do you have to move to adjourn?
Yep.
Move to adjourn?
Motion second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.